Welcome to Time Before Us, the channel where ancient history breathes again. Before time had a name, before the first human breath, there existed a world fierce, forgotten, and alive. Creatures of scale and silence, predators wrapped in feathers, titans that shook the earth, lives erased, bones buried beneath eternity. But they are not lost, they are waiting. This is Time Before Us, where prehistory worlds rise again, and the stories buried in stone finally speak. Chapter 1. Before dinosaurs took over the Earth, the planet was already a dangerous, dramatic, and ever-changing place. But the story of dinosaurs doesn't begin with their first roar. It starts long before that, in a world teetering on the edge of annihilation. The Earth had already witnessed multiple evolutionary experiments, some that rose to dominance and others that vanished as mysteriously as they appeared. In fact, dinosaurs didn't just show up by chance. Their rise was the result of survival, timing, and a series of ancient events that wiped the slate clean for something new to take root. If you want to understand how the dinosaurs conquered the planet, you have to start with the world they inherited and the one that came before. Roughly 252 million years ago, Earth experienced the most devastating extinction event in its history. Known as the Permian-Triassic extinction, or the Great Dying, this catastrophe wiped out more than 90% of marine species and around 70% of land animals. Volcanoes in what's now Siberia erupted on a scale we can barely imagine, unleashing enough lava to cover continents and releasing massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The result was global warming so extreme that oceans became acidic and nearly lifeless, forests collapsed, food chains disintegrated. It wasn't just a bad year, it was a planetary crisis that lasted thousands of years. And yet, from this unimaginable destruction came an opportunity. The dominant species were gone, the old rules were shattered, and in their place, new survivors emerged resilient, adaptable, and ready to evolve. Among them were the earliest ancestors of the dinosaurs. When dinosaurs finally appeared in the fossil record, around 230 to 240 million years ago, they didn't look anything like the towering giants we associate with the word today. They were small, bipedal, and fast. One of the earliest known dinosaurs, Eoraptor, was no larger than a house cat. It ran on two legs, had a long tail for balance, and likely hunted small prey. These first dinosaurs weren't dominant predators or mighty herbivores, they were opportunists. What gave them the edge wasn't size, but structure. Their legs were positioned directly beneath their bodies, unlike many of the other reptiles that sprawled out to the sides like lizards. This upright stance made them faster, more energy efficient, and better equipped for long-distance movement. Combined with lightweight bones and potentially warm-blooded traits, they had a crucial advantage in a world that was still recovering from disaster. But dinosaurs weren't the first strange reptiles to walk the earth. Before them came a parade of odd creatures, some that looked almost prehistoric beyond belief. Take Dimetrodon, for example, a creature with a sail-like structure on its back that lived long before the first dinosaur. Although it's often mistaken for a dinosaur in pop culture, Dimetrodon wasn't one at all. It was a synapsid, more closely related to mammals than reptiles. And yet, it ruled the land during the Permian period, stalking swamps and dry plains with its curved teeth and powerful jaws. Many of these early beasts were wiped out during the Great Dying, and their absence cleared space for the true dinosaurs to emerge. The giants before the giants, in many ways, were the prototypes. Dinosaurs were the refined version. Another unsung hero in this origin story. Plants. In the chaotic aftermath of the Permian extinction, vast forests were reduced to dust. But as the earth stabilized, a new generation of hardy plants began to dominate seed ferns, conifers, and other gymnosperms that could survive in drier, more volatile environments. These plants formed the foundation of early ecosystems and allowed herbivorous dinosaurs to evolve alongside them. Without this botanical resurgence, there would have been no food web to support large terrestrial animals. It's a quiet part of the dinosaur saga, but absolutely critical. Then came another twist: climate change. Around 230 million years ago, global temperatures began to rise again. For many large reptiles and competitors of the time, like the crocodile-like archosaurs, this was a death sentence. They couldn't handle the heat, but the early dinosaurs? They thrived in it. Whether they were warm-blooded or just incredibly efficient at regulating body temperature, they began to outcompete other species and spread across the supercontinent of Pangaea. Not through brute force, but through quiet, persistent adaptability. Their time had come, not through conquest, but through endurance. So when we imagine dinosaurs suddenly exploding onto the scene as unstoppable monsters, we miss the real story. They weren't the inevitable rulers of the earth. They were survivors who got their chance because the world collapsed and they were uniquely built to handle what came after. From tiny, nimble scavengers to the titans that would eventually shake the ground with every step, the dinosaurs rose in the shadow of extinction. And the world they inherited, the broken forests, the scorched skies, the silence after disaster shaped everything they became. Chapter 2: Dawn of the Dinosaurs didn't arrive with a bang. They didn't storm the stage or erupt from the earth, fully formed as the giants we've come to know. Their origin story is quieter, stranger. It begins not with a roar, but with a shuffle in the underbrush, small feet darting through the Triassic heat, eyes scanning for insects, predators, or a safe place to sleep. If you'd been alive 240 million years ago, odds are you wouldn't have even noticed them. And yet, in those tiny, agile forms, history was being rewritten. Not by domination, but by endurance. At this point in Earth's story, life was clawing its way back from near-total annihilation. The Great Dying, the Permian-Triassic extinction, had reset everything. More than 90% of marine life was gone, along with most land animals. Forests had collapsed, and whole ecosystems were erased in the blink of a geological eye. But that devastation created a rare opportunity, a blank slate. A new world was taking shape from the ashes. And the world these early dinosaurs inherited was nothing like today. There were no flowers, no birds, no grasses waving in the wind. Instead, conifers, cycads, and giant ferns covered the land. The air was hot, oxygen levels were lower, and dry seasons could last for months. Insects buzzed in dense swarms, and the sun scorched a supercontinent known as Pangaea. That single landmass was surrounded by a vast global ocean and marked by violent extremes, deserts that stretched to the horizon, volcanoes that tore through the crust, and seasonal monsoons that drenched the parched land. But the land wasn't empty. Archosaurs, the dominant reptiles of the time, ruled the terrain. Some were built like crocodiles, others like wolves. Some were herbivores with armor-plated hides, others fast-moving killers with knife-like teeth. Among these were the Pseudotsuchians, ancient relatives of modern crocs, and they were absolutely everywhere. Unlike today's sluggish river dwellers, these animals were fast, terrestrial, and deadly. In fact, for the first few million years of dinosaur existence, these crocodile cousins were the apex predators. Dinosaurs? They were barely getting started. In fact, for a long time, they were marginal players. Tiny bipedal insectivores that lived in the shadows literally and figuratively. A raptor, one of the earliest confirmed dinosaurs, was small enough to cradle in your arms. It had lightweight bones, a long tail, and teeth suited for a mixed diet, likely hunting insects, small lizards, and anything else it could catch. It wasn't a predator of the plains, it was a survivor, a skittish, opportunistic animal in a dangerous world. But it had something special. Something the Pseudotsuchians didn't. Dinosaurs had posture. It may not sound exciting, but it was revolutionary. Most reptiles of the time had legs that sprawled out to the sides, making them slower, less efficient, and vulnerable to overheating during long exertion. Dinosaurs evolved an upright gait, with legs positioned directly under their bodies, more like a bird or a mammal. This gave them better balance, better breathing, and much greater stamina. That small tweak in anatomy would become the foundation of their future success. There's also growing evidence that many early dinosaurs may have had higher metabolisms than their cold-blooded peers. Maybe not full endothermy warm-bloodedness, as we know it, but something in between, a physiological edge. One that allowed them to function in wider climates and recover from effort faster. These weren't lumbering reptiles sunning themselves on rocks. These were quick, alert, and constantly adapting, and yet, dinosaurs still weren't taking over. For tens of millions of years, they remained in the background. They lived alongside all sorts of strange creatures, massive amphibians the size of crocodiles, sail-backed reptiles like placerias, armored herbivores and beaked lizards, and giant land-dwelling relatives of turtles. The Triassic was a testing ground for evolution. A world full of bizarre experiments, some of which went extinct without ever making it into the spotlight. But something was happening beneath the surface. Dinosaurs were diversifying. Different species were evolving along different paths. Some stayed small and agile, like Coelophysis, a lightweight, two-legged predator that hunted in packs. Others began shifting toward plant-based diets, leading to the first long-necked, barrel-bodied herbivores like Plateosaurus. These early sauropodomorphs were still modest compared to the giants of the Jurassic, but they were laying the groundwork. And then, the world changed again. Roughly 201 million years ago, a second mass extinction event struck at the end of the Triassic. The causes are still debated. Massive volcanic eruptions across what's now the Atlantic Ocean are the leading theory. Lava flows covered thousands of square miles, the atmosphere filled with carbon dioxide. Temperatures spiked, oxygen levels plummeted, oceans turned toxic. Entire lineages of reptiles, amphibians, and marine life disappeared. But dinosaurs? They survived. Why? We don't know for certain. But their physiology, upright posture, efficient breathing, possibly higher metabolism, may have given them a crucial advantage. While other reptiles suffocated, overheated, or starved, dinosaurs pushed through. And when the dust settled, they were the last major group of terrestrial archosaurs standing. That was the turning point. In the extinction's aftermath. With ecosystems vacant and competitors gone, dinosaurs finally had space to expand. And expand they did rapidly and explosively. Within just a few million years, they spread across Pangaea in every direction. Different groups evolved to take over every available niche. Swift hunters, colossal herbivores, armored tanks, gliding forms, even early flyers. But this wasn't just a biological fluke. It was evolutionary momentum. Every adaptation they had developed during the Triassic, the lightweight skeletons, the upright limbs, the agile brains, was now paying off. It was as if evolution had been sharpening its blade for 40 million years. Now it was cutting through. And what's perhaps most surprising is how long this process took. From their earliest fossils to their total dominance took tens of millions of years. There was no instant transformation. It wasn't like a switch was flipped and suddenly dinosaurs ruled the earth. It was more like a slow, inevitable march, driven by advantage, reinforced by extinction, and fueled by opportunity. Even then, the dinosaurs we know best, Stegosaurus, Allosaurus, T-Rex, were still far in the future. At this point in time, they hadn't even begun to exist. But their ancestors were everywhere, experimenting with form, size, diet, and behavior. The blueprint was set. The age of dinosaurs had officially begun, and yet, think about this. Had the Triassic extinction never happened, it's possible dinosaurs would have remained a minor footnote, an evolutionary side branch in a world dominated by croc-like predators and armored herbivores. The only reason they rose was because of global catastrophe. The lesson? Evolution isn't always about who's best. It's often about who's left. We often imagine the dawn of dinosaurs as a dramatic takeover, but it was anything but. It was patient, relentless, unfolding in silence. It didn't make headlines, but it rewrote the planet's story. Because when the dust settled after the end Triassic extinction, only one group had the tools, the traits, and the timing to thrive. And those small, nimble, upright reptiles, barely noticed just a few million years before, became the rulers of the next 135 million years. Chapter 3, The First Giants. Before the ground-shaking titans of the Jurassic roamed the earth, before Brachiosaurus towered like a skyscraper above the treetops, or Argentinosaurus carried the weight of a semi-truck on each foot, there were the prototypes, the first true giants. And though they were modest by later standards, they changed the rules of life on land forever. Let's go back to a time when dinosaurs were still experimenting with size. Not small enough to hide anymore, but not yet the thunderous behemoths they'd become. This chapter of the Mesozoic, spanning the late Triassic into the early Jurassic, was when evolution first tested the limits of how big an animal could be and still survive. It started subtly. Picture a dinosaur like Plateosaurus. It lived around 210 million years ago in what's now Europe. At first glance, it doesn't look like much compared to the giants we think of today. But it was a landmark creature reaching lengths of up to 30 feet, weighing several tons and standing on two thick legs with a long neck balanced by an even longer tail. It could rear up to browse higher plants, walk on all fours if needed, and probably had a flexible diet. It wasn't a predator, but it was no pushover. What made Plateosaurus remarkable wasn't just its size. It was the fact that it was one of the first dinosaurs to figure out how to get big and stay big. This was a dangerous evolutionary experiment. Being large comes with trade-offs. You need more food, more water, more space. You grow slower, reproduce more cautiously, and you're easier to spot. But if you can cross a certain threshold, size becomes a weapon. Predators have a harder time taking you down. You can push through forests, reach food no one else can, and regulate your body temperature better. In short, size becomes survival. And Plateosaurus was only the beginning. These early giants belonged to a group called the sauropodomorphs, the ancestors of the sauropods, those long-necked herbivores that would later dominate the Jurassic landscape. But back in the Triassic and early Jurassic, they were still figuring things out. Some were quadrupeds. Others could switch between walking on 2 legs and 4. Some were narrow-snouted browsers. Others had heavier jaws, better suited for chewing rougher vegetation. Then came a major turning point. The Jurassic period began. The continents began drifting apart, and with them came profound environmental changes. Forests expanded. Rainfall increased. Vegetation grew taller and denser. And in this leafy, lush new world, the sauropodomorphs had their moment. Evolution responded the way it often does, with exaggeration. Some dinosaurs began growing to sizes never seen before. The shift from small to giant wasn't just about scale, it was about strategy. And the true sauropods, the classic long-necked, 4-legged giants, were the outcome of that transformation. Enter Volcanodon. Despite its name, it wasn't a fire-breathing monster, but it may have walked near volcanoes in what is now southern Africa. It lived in the early Jurassic and was one of the first dinosaurs to show true sauropod features: column-like legs, an elongated neck, and a body built for slow, steady browsing. It stood at the edge of a new age where plant-eating dinosaurs didn't need to run from predators because they had become too big to bother. But things didn't stop there. As we move further into the Jurassic, the sizes get even more dramatic. Dinosaurus from China was around 30 feet long and sported a club at the end of its tail. Yes, even herbivores were learning to defend themselves. Barapasaurus from India followed with a more typical sauropod build. And by the time we get to the mid-Jurassic, giants like Patagosaurus were pushing beyond 50 feet in length. What's astonishing is how quickly this escalation happened. Within just 30 million years, sauropods went from animals the size of cows to animals the size of buses. Why? Because nature allowed them to. Lush vegetation offered endless fuel. Their bodies became more efficient. Long necks let them eat without moving much. Hollow bones kept their skeletons light. And huge digestive systems let them extract energy from tough fibrous plants. Their strategy wasn't speed, it was endurance. They weren't just passive eating machines. These animals had complex lives. Living in herds offered protection. Traveling long distances allowed them to follow food and water. Fossil sites show evidence of migration patterns, nesting grounds, and even possible social behavior. Herds of sauropods may have stretched for miles, leaving behind trails of massive footprints that we can still find today. But with size came vulnerability too. Young sauropods were prime targets. When they hatched, they were tiny, sometimes just the size of a cat. Growing up in a world of massive predators meant that only the most fortunate survived. That's likely why some species laid dozens, even hundreds of eggs at a time. In many ways, their survival strategy was quantity over quality. Yet somehow, it worked. Sauropods became one of the most successful groups in dinosaur history, thriving on every continent for over 100 million years. And it all started with those early giants, the ones that first broke free from the limitations of small bodies and small appetites. But here's the twist. Growing large wasn't just about survival. It may have been about competition, not with predators, but with each other. Imagine standing in a prehistoric forest where every herbivore is trying to eat the same plants. Being taller meant you could reach food no one else could. Being heavier meant you could push others aside. Over time, natural selection favored those who could eat more, reach higher, and move farther. And that arms race driven, not by fangs, but by ferns produced the largest animals ever to walk the earth. It's easy to think of dinosaurs as all teeth and claws, but these early giants tell a different story. A story of endurance, of slow, steady growth, of using size not as a weapon, but as a way to thrive in a challenging world. And perhaps most impressively, they did it with brains the size of oranges. The truth is, the first giants weren't just a phase in evolution, they were a revolution. They redefined what it meant to be successful on land. They showed that you didn't need to be fast or smart to dominate an ecosystem. You just needed to be big enough, long enough, and hungry enough. And the ground has never been the same since. Chapter 4. Jurassic Oddities. The Jurassic period wasn't just the age of giants, it was also the age of the bizarre. Sure, most people remember the towering Brachiosaurus or the fearsome Allosaurus, but dig a little deeper, and you'll find a world of creatures so strange they seem like science fiction. Some had thumb spikes, others had mohawk crests. A few even sported sails on their backs, or noses so large they could practically smell a thunderstorm. This chapter is about those weirdos, the evolutionary outliers, the ones that leave even paleontologists scratching their heads and asking, what on earth was that for? Let's start with a dinosaur that looks like it was halfway through becoming something else, Stegosaurus. At first glance, it's almost cartoonishly designed. A row of massive, kite-shaped plates running down its spine, a tiny head, a heavy, arched back, and of course that infamous spiked tail, the thagomizer. For years, scientists argued over the purpose of those plates. Were they armor? Were they for display? Or maybe even thermal regulation? Current theories suggest the plates were rich in blood vessels and may have helped The animal absorb or shed heat like solar panels. Others believe they were primarily for display to look bigger, attract mates, or even scare predators. Whatever the case, Stegosaurus wasn't just a walking fortress, it was a living mystery dot. And then there's Camarasaurus. At first glance, it looks pretty standard, just another long-necked sauropod. But look closer at its skull. It had enormous nasal openings, so large they made up almost the entire top of its head. For years, this led to the theory that sauropods like Camarasaurus might have had a snorkel-like trunk or spent much of their lives submerged in water. Today, we know they were fully terrestrial animals, but those huge nostrils still puzzle scientists. Could they have helped with scent? Or maybe they cooled the brain by channeling air? Or was it another weird case of dinosaur anatomy doing more than one job at once? Let's not forget the peculiar Ceratosaurus, a meat-eating dinosaur from the Tating Late Jurassic. What set it apart? It had a horn on its nose, like a rhinoceros, and small, bony ridges above its eyes. Not exactly the sleek, deadly design of a modern predator. The horn likely wasn't for fighting, it was too fragile. More likely, it was for display. Maybe it helped with species recognition or mating rituals. Picture two Ceratosaurus males circling each other, displaying their flashy horns like prehistoric peacocks, trying to win over a female's attention. And speaking of flashy, let's take a detour to Dilophosaurus. Yes, the one made famous by Jurassic Park. The film gave it a frill and a venom-spitting ability, both entirely fictional. But the real dinosaur had its own built-in oddity, a pair of thin, bony crests running along the top of its skull. These crests served no practical purpose for hunting. They were likely delicate and not suited for combat. But for display? Perfect. Evolution often rewards being noticed, that we see this trend again and again in the Jurassic dinosaurs with strange ornamentation, wild colors, though we can only guess, and body features that seem to exist purely to make a statement. Sometimes, nature doesn't select for what's useful. It selects for what's showy, what's memorable, what makes you stand out in a herd of lookalikes. Take Monolophosaurus, for example. Its name means single-crested lizard, and it had a big, hollow crest down the center of its skull. Not for scent, not for fighting. Most likely, again, for display. Could it have made sounds through it? Vibrated it during calls? That's speculative, but not impossible. Think of how many modern animals, from birds to frogs, use strange body parts to amplify their voices. Now, let's step outside the dinosaur group for a moment into a reptile that shared the skies with them, Rhamphorhynchus. This pterosaur had a long tail with a diamond-shaped vein at the end, like a living kite. Its jaws were filled with needle-like teeth, perfect for catching fish mid-flight. But it's that tail vein that grabs attention. Was it a rudder? A mating? Display? A way to control its glide? Maybe all three. Whatever the case, it shows that weirdness wasn't limited to land. Back on solid ground, we meet Meganchosaurus, one of the strangest sauropods of the Jurassic. Its neck made up half its body length, stretching up to 30 feet long. For comparison, that's longer than most school buses. But what's weirder is how little we know about how it held that neck. Could it even raise it high like a giraffe? Or did it sweep it side to side like a giant lawnmower? Some studies suggest its neck was stiff. Others argue it had impressive flexibility. What's clear is that it was built to feed over wide areas without needing to move much. Efficiency through elongation. But not all Jurassic oddities were giants. Consider ornitholestes, a small predator with long limbs, a narrow snout, and possibly a nasal horn. Like many theropods of its size, it was agile, quick, and smart. Its odd features? Possibly keen eyesight, forward-facing eyes for depth perception, and the potential for feathers. Yes, even in the Jurassic, dinosaurs were starting to flirt with fluff. And then there's Anchiornis, a feathered dinosaur that lived near the end of the Jurassic. It was covered in filament-like feathers, with long plumes on its arms and legs, and likely had the capacity for gliding. It's one of the clearest signs that the transition from dinosaurs to birds was already well underway. Its feathers weren't just insulation, they were style, survival, and possibly even lift. What ties all these strange features together is a simple idea. Evolution isn't tidy. It doesn't design things the way we would. It improvises. It reuses, it exaggerates. That's how you get sailbacks, thumb spikes, and dinosaurs with nostrils bigger than their brains. Sometimes weirdness is just what works. But here's the twist. Many of these oddities weren't rare. In their time, they were normal. It's only with the benefit of hindsight that we call them strange. To a Stegosaurus, those backplates weren't decorative, they were identity. To a Ceratosaurus, that horn wasn't weird, it was impressive. To a Mamenchisaurus, that enormous neck wasn't a burden, it was the key to survival. So maybe the lesson here is this. In nature, strange isn't the exception. It's the rule. And the Jurassic period? It was nature's biggest, boldest experiment yet. Chapter 5, Dinosaurs of the Deep. When most people picture dinosaurs, they imagine towering beasts stomping across land forests, shaking sauropods, thunderous theropods, and armored herbivores bristling with spikes. But there's another place we tend to mentally fill with dinosaurs: the oceans. It's a common misconception, those massive toothy sea monsters we often see in books or movies. Not dinosaurs, they were marine reptiles. Different group. Different evolutionary path. But just as mind-blowing. So why do we confuse them so often? Maybe it's because they lived at the same time. Maybe it's the size. Or maybe it's the teeth. Whatever the reason, the seas of the Mesozoic era were filled with creatures that looked every bit as monstrous and fascinating as their land-dwelling cousins. Let's begin with the most iconic, plesiosaurs. Long-necked, paddle-limbed, and smooth-bodied, they're the classic sea monster silhouette. You've probably seen them depicted as the Loch Ness Monster. But plesiosaurs were no myths. They were real, and they were everywhere. One species, Elasmosaurus, had a neck so long it contained up to 76 vertebrae, more than any other known animal. That neck could stretch nearly 20 feet, longer than its body and tail combined. But how it used that neck is still debated. Did it swan through the water like a serpent, plucking fish with graceful arcs? Or did it stay still, using its long reach to ambush prey without moving its bulky body? The mechanics of a neck that long underwater are complex and maybe even limiting. But in the Mesozoic oceans, it worked. Then there were the pliosaurs, the muscle-bound cousins of the plesiosaurs. Unlike their long-necked relatives, pliosaurs had short necks, massive jaws, and skulls that could dwarf a grown human. Take Liopleurodon, for example. While earlier media exaggerated its size, it was still a giant predator, up to 25 feet long, with a bite that could crush bone. Its teeth were conical and serrated, designed to grip slippery prey and shear through flesh like a giant pair of scissors. These weren't passive gliders, they were apex hunters. Swimming beside them, in the open blue, were the ichthyosaurs. If plesiosaurs looked like sea monsters, ichthyosaurs looked like dolphins. If dolphins had swordfish snouts and terrifying eyes, some ichthyosaurs had eyes the size of dinner plates. Why? Likely for hunting in deep, dark waters where light barely reached. They were fast, streamlined, and some could even give live birth in the water, just like modern whales. In fact, ichthyosaurs are one of the earliest examples of vertebrates adapting so completely to life in the ocean that they never returned to land. Their evolution was fast, and it was stunning. One of the largest Shawnosaurus reached over 65 feet long, longer than a bus, and still maintained that torpedo shape. Imagine an ocean predator the size of a blue whale. That's what swam the ancient seas. Then came a new breed of terror, the Mosasaurus. Now this is a name that rings a bell for many, thanks in part to Hollywood. And yes, Mosasaurus was as formidable as its movie portrayal. A massive marine reptile with double-hinged jaws and a crushing bite. It was the crocodile of the Cretaceous seas, except bigger. Growing up to 50 feet long, it wasn't just a scavenger. It was a top predator, eating fish, turtles, and even other mosasaurs. What's more, mosasaurs were close relatives of snakes and monitor lizards, terrestrial reptiles that, at some point, took to the water and never looked back. Their evolution included developing paddle-like limbs, a powerful tail, and lungs, suited for deep, long dives. But the most terrifying feature? Some species had extra rows of teeth on the roof of their mouths to keep prey from escaping, similar to snakes. Once you were caught, you weren't getting out. And let's not forget the marine crocodiliforms. These weren't your modern-day alligators sunning on a riverbank. Some, like Dinosaurus, had shortened, robust skulls with teeth more like a theropod dinosaur than a modern croc. They hunted actively in open water, sharing space with mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. It was a deadly arms race, and the ocean was the battlefield. Even sharks had their ancient titans. Quatoxirina, often called the Ginsu shark, was an enormous, fast-swimming killer with razor-sharp teeth that could saw through bone. It patrolled the seas long before Megalodon came along, proving that terrifying sharks weren't exclusive to the Cenozoic. So what did the marine ecosystem look like during the age of dinosaurs? In a word, competitive. Unlike the land where dinosaurs reigned supreme, the oceans were a swirling mix of marine reptiles, fish, sharks, ammonites, squid, and other invertebrates, all in constant motion, all playing out a dramatic, often violent, food web. And through it all, dinosaurs stayed landlocked. Despite the occasional misrepresentation, no true dinosaur ever evolved to live in the sea. Some, like Spinosaurus, got close. It's thought to have been semi-aquatic, possibly wading or swimming in river systems. But fully marine life? That was left to the others. Why? It may have to do with respiratory systems, reproductive strategies, or simple evolutionary path dependency. Dinosaurs had developed so effectively for land that there may have been little advantage in giving up their terrestrial throne. Still, some came close. Birds, the only surviving dinosaurs, took to the skies, and some returned to water, like penguins. But a true dinosaur of the deep? It never happened. And yet, the creatures that did rule the oceans were no less spectacular. In fact, in many ways, they were even more alien. Enormous eyes that could see in blackness, neck lengths that defied engineering, tails like rudders, jaws like hydraulic traps, limbs reshaped into paddles, lungs re-engineered for deep dives, bodies fine-tuned for speed. And stealth. The marine reptiles of the Mesozoic were sculpted by pressure, literally and metaphorically. Every depth they dove, every predator they faced, every prey they chased added a brushstroke to their evolving design. And what resulted was an aquatic cast of characters that still captures our imagination today. Perhaps the most mind-blowing fact of all, none of these creatures left descendants. Plesiosaurs, mosasaurs, ichthyosaurs, they all vanished in the Great Extinction Event 66 million years ago. Only the sharks, fish, and some marine invertebrates survived to see the modern oceans, but their fossils remain etched into stone, embedded in cliff faces, pulled from ancient seabeds. And every time we unearth a new skeleton, we're reminded of just how wild and unpredictable life in the deep used to be. The dinosaurs may have ruled the land, but the oceans belong to something else entirely. Chapter 6, Raptor Intelligence. The word raptor, and your brain probably jumps straight to sharp claws, slashing talons, and that eerie stare made famous by Jurassic Park. And yes, that image isn't totally wrong. Raptors, or more accurately, dromaeosaurs, were fast, agile, and armed with weapons that could tear into prey with terrifying efficiency. But there's one thing we've long underestimated: their brains, because behind those serrated teeth and slicing claws was something much more intriguing. These weren't mindless killers. They were thinkers, problem solvers, pack hunters. Some of the smartest dinosaurs to ever walk the earth. Let's start with the basics. The most famous raptor of all, Velociraptor, wasn't the human-sized nightmare the movies made it out to be. In reality, it was about the size of a turkey. But don't laugh, this little predator punched well above its weight. Paleontologists have been studying the brain cases of raptors using advanced imaging techniques, and the results are fascinating. Raptors had large, forward-facing eyes, a telltale sign of good depth perception, crucial for a predator that needed to leap, grasp, and attack with precision. But what really turned heads was their unusually large brains for their body size. We call this encephalization. In short, it's a way to measure intelligence potential. And in dromaeosaurs, the numbers are impressive, closer to modern birds of prey than to lumbering dinosaurs. Their brains had enlarged areas linked to vision and motor control. That means these weren't just animals reacting by instinct. They were likely processing information, adapting in real time, making calculated moves. Now let's talk social behavior. Some fossil sites have unearthed what appears to be groups of raptors preserved together, such as Deinonychus, another iconic dromaeosaur. Did they hunt in packs? That idea has sparked debate for decades. The evidence isn't rock solid, pun intended, but it's suggestive. Multiple individuals found near a single prey item hints at coordinated action. And if they did hunt together, that implies communication, planning, and dare we say it, strategy. It's a trait we associate with wolves, lions, and orcas, not reptiles. But raptors may have been the Mesozoic version of those cooperative predators, working together to bring down larger animals, possibly using decoys or ambush tactics. Maybe even taking turns. What about learning? There's a striking fossil of a velociraptor locked in combat with a protoceratops literally mid-fight, their bones preserved in sand like a moment frozen in time. This suggests not just aggression, but potentially targeted hunting behavior, choosing prey carefully, going for weak points, and using terrain to their advantage. None of that happens without learning through experience. And here's where feathers come in. Yes, raptors had them. And not just a few decorative plumes. Most dromaeosaurs were covered head to toe. This was more than just insulation. In modern birds, feathers play a huge role in communication, visual signals that convey dominance, readiness to mate, or warnings. If raptors used feathers the same way, it implies social complexity. The ability to signal to others, to warn, to attract, to coordinate. Some scientists even believe raptors may have used their feathered limbs for display or balance while running and attacking, early experiments in aerodynamic control, maybe even gliding in smaller species. These were adaptable, innovative creatures. Their inner ears, measured in 3D scans, show that raptors had excellent balance and coordination. These weren't clumsy, tail-dragging reptiles. They were more like deadly acrobats, leaping and twisting. Midair, keeping their eyes locked on their target the entire time. Imagine an owl with the speed of a cheetah and the claws of a tiger. That's the vibe. And let's not forget their claws, the iconic sickle-shaped weapon on their second toe. It was once thought to be used for slashing. Now some believe it was more like a climbing hook or a pinning tool, something to dig into prey and hold it in place while the raptor delivered precise, fatal bites. That's not brute force. That's control. The more we uncover, the more they start to feel less like dinosaurs and more like terrifyingly clever birds, which, to be honest, isn't far off. Birds are, after all, living dinosaurs. And if you've ever seen a crow solve a puzzle, a parrot mimic human speech, or a hawk track a rabbit across open ground, You've seen raptor intelligence in action. Modern birds are the legacy of these ancient hunters. And in them we still see the same traits: sharp minds, complex behavior, lightning reflexes, and yes, an unsettling level of awareness. In some ways, the smartest dinosaurs didn't go extinct. They evolved, they took to the skies, and they're watching us from the trees right now. So the next time you see a bird cock its head and study you with one eye, ask yourself, what is it thinking? Because if its ancestors are anything to go by, maybe more than you'd expect. Chapter 7. Arctic Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs in the snow. That sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? For decades, most people imagined dinosaurs as tropical creatures, lumbering through steamy jungles, basking in the sun, never straying too far from warmth. But the fossil record tells a different story. One that unfolds not under a blazing sun, but beneath long winters, snow-laced forests, and months of darkness. Because yes, dinosaurs lived in the Arctic. And not just visited. They thrived there. Let's start with a location that's become ground zero for this chilly revelation. Northern Alaska, specifically the Prince Creek Formation. It's one of the most important polar dinosaur sites on Earth. Every year, paleontologists brave frigid winds, polar bears, and relentless tundra to excavate fossils buried under permafrost. And what they're finding is reshaping everything we thought we knew about dino habitats. Among the creatures found here, duck-billed hadrosaurs like Edmontosaurus, horned dinosaurs like Pachyrhinosaurus, small raptors like Trudon, and even tyrannosaur relatives like Nanuqsaurus, nicknamed the polar bear lizard. These weren't vacationing from the tropics. They lived here year-round. Here's what makes that so remarkable. During the Cretaceous, the Arctic was warmer than today, but still cold, especially during the long dark winters when the sun barely touched the horizon for months. There would have been snow. There would have been frost. So how did they survive? One clue comes from bone histology, basically, looking at the microscopic structure of fossilized bones. Growth rings, like those in trees, can tell us how fast an animal was growing and whether it paused during tough seasons. Some Arctic dinosaurs show signs of continuous growth, even through the coldest periods. That means they weren't migrating. They were toughing it out, adapting to the freeze. Feathers may have been key. Small theropods like Trudon were likely covered in feathers for insulation, essentially like early down jackets. And not just any feathers. Fossil impressions suggest dense plumage, perfect for trapping body heat. Think of them like prehistoric snowbirds, darting through frosty underbrush, hunting small mammals and staying cozy in their feathered coats. And here's a fascinating twist. Trudon had one of the largest brain-to-body ratios of any dinosaur. Combine that with huge eyes, and what do you get? A clever predator likely adapted to hunting in low light or even near darkness. Arctic winters are long and sunless, after all. Imagine a cunning, owl-like raptor stalking the icy twilight in silence. But it wasn't just the small ones that toughed it out. Hadrosaurs, huge, herbivorous, duck-billed dinosaurs, were found in vast numbers in Arctic formations. Some scientists believe they may have migrated, but others argue they stayed put, perhaps huddling in forests and feeding on bark, ferns, and evergreen foliage. Fossilized footprints suggest groups, maybe even herds traveling together. Could they have dug through snow to find food? Or had built-in seasonal strategies like hibernation or slowing their metabolism? And let's talk about Pachyrhinosaurus, a relative of Triceratops with a bony boss on its face instead of horns. It's been found in high-latitude sites in both Alaska and Canada. These were stocky, powerful plant eaters, possibly moving in family herds, raising their young in the safety of the group. Fossilized bone beds suggest dozens, even hundreds, dying together, perhaps after a catastrophic flood or seasonal event. Their social behavior, body mass, and warm-blooded adaptations may have helped them endure the cold. Warm-blooded. That idea changes everything. For a long time, Dinosaurs were assumed to be cold-blooded like modern reptiles, dependent on external temperatures to function. But evidence is mounting that many species, especially those in extreme environments, had elevated metabolisms. Not fully warm-blooded like mammals or birds, but something in between what scientists call mesothermic. Enough internal heat to power through chilly nights and long winters. And if that's true, then Arctic dinosaurs weren't exceptions. They were proof that dinosaurs were far more adaptable, widespread, and versatile than we ever imagined. Here's another twist: dinosaur nests have been found in these polar regions. That's right, they nested in the Arctic. Laid eggs, raised hatchlings. That completely rules out the idea of long migrations. You don't build nests and raise babies in a place you're only passing through. It also raises even more questions. How did hatchlings survive the cold? Did parents guard the nests? Did young dinosaurs grow quickly to survive their first winter? Some of the answers might lie in modern birds again, our living links to the dinosaurs. Arctic bird species today build insulated nests, shield eggs with body heat, and teach chicks to forage fast. Perhaps dinosaurs had similar behaviors. After all, some theropods are now known to have brooded their eggs, sitting on them like modern birds. But let's not stop at Alaska. Fossils have also been found in polar Australia, back when it was positioned near the South Pole. Small herbivores like Leelanosaura and Coolosochus, the former with huge eyes, suggesting vision adapted to dim, polar light. These weren't just cold survivors. They were creatures made for the snow. Imagine a world blanketed in silence. The only light, a pale glow on the horizon. Snow crunches under clawed feet. A raptor darts through frosted ferns. A herd of duckbills huddles in a thicket, breathing out clouds of warm air. This was not the warm, tropical paradise we were taught in school. This was another side of the Mesozoic, harsh, beautiful, and alive with resilience. Dinosaurs didn't just dominate, they adapted to deserts, to swamps, and yes, to the edge of the world, where snow falls and the sun disappears for weeks. On it's one of the greatest surprises in paleontology that creatures we once thought of as cold-blooded lizards in the heat were, in many cases, warm-blooded survivors of the snow. Chapter 8, built to battle. When we picture dinosaurs, it's often their bizarre armor and terrifying weapons that steal the spotlight: massive horns, bone-crushing tails, backs lined with jagged plates. But here's the real question: were these features just for show? Or were dinosaurs truly built for battle? Turns out, many of these creatures were living tanks, evolution's answer to brute force warfare. And their weapons weren't just random ornaments. They were precise, biologically engineered tools for survival. And sometimes for all-out combat. Let's start with the classic, the ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs. Everyone knows Triceratops, right? The big, three-horned face, massive frill, and tank-like body. But what those horns were used for has sparked a fiery debate among scientists for decades. Were they for defense against predators like T-Rex, for mating rituals, for fighting each other? Evidence is mounting that it was all of the above. Paleontologists have found healed wounds on Triceratops skulls, puncture marks that match the spacing of other ceratopsian horns. That's a big deal. It means they weren't just using their horns as static decorations, they were actively sparring. Think of it like modern-day deer or bighorn sheep locking antlers. Ceratopsians likely used their facial weaponry to clash with rivals, compete for mates, and defend themselves from predators. But then you get even stranger examples, like Styracosaurus with its massive nasal horn and wild crown of spines on its frill. Or Cosmoceratops, whose skull was so over-decorated it looked like a medieval mace. Some of those horns may have had a secondary purpose: visual intimidation. A way of saying, "Don't mess with me," without ever having to fight. Sometimes, the best weapon is the one you don't have to use. On the other end of the spectrum, You have the living fortresses, the ankylosaurs. Imagine a dinosaur crossed with a tank. That's Ankylosaurus. This beast had armor so thick, it could probably shrug off attacks from even the most fearsome predators. Rows of osteoderms, bony plates embedded in the skin lined its back and tail. And speaking of that tail, it ended in a massive club, like an actual bone mace. Thick, solid, and swinging with the force of a wrecking ball. Studies show it could deliver blows hard enough to break bone, possibly even shatter the legs of an attacking T-Rex, and this wasn't wild speculation. Fossils of predators with leg injuries that could be attributed to tail club impacts give this idea real weight. If you ever imagined a dinosaur swinging a medieval weapon around like a pro, this is it. But not all dinosaur armor was about defense. Take stegosaurs. Everyone knows their spiky tails and backplates. But here's the thing, those tail spikes, often called thagomizers, weren't just pretty. They were lethal. One fossil of an Allosaurus, a huge carnivore, shows a deep puncture wound in its pelvis that perfectly matches a stegosaur tail spike. That's direct evidence of a defensive hit. And likely a fatal one. Those spikes weren't just for show. They were battle-tested. Interestingly, the big backplates of Stegosaurus probably weren't used in combat. Some paleontologists think they helped regulate body temperature, kind of like solar panels. Others think they were for visual display, maybe to attract mates or scare rivals. But that tail? That was the business end. Let's not forget the predators in this arms race. Raptors like the Deinonychus and Velociraptor had sickle-shaped claws on their second toes, razor-sharp, curved talons designed for slashing. The name Deinonychus even means terrible claw. These weren't just for killing, they were for pinning prey down, slicing through flesh, and holding on like grappling hooks. It's a chilling image. A pack of raptors working together to bring down a struggling prey, claws flashing in coordinated fury. But the most terrifying weapon in the Mesozoic might belong to Therizinosaurus. This bizarre dinosaur had the body of a giant sloth, a long neck, and claws that stretched up to 3 feet long. Seriously, 3 feet. Like swords at the end of its arms. What were they used for? That's still a mystery. Therizinosaurus was an herbivore, strangely enough. So maybe those claws were for stripping vegetation, pulling down branches. Or maybe defense, or maybe both. Imagine a predator lunging in, only to be met by a wide slash from those monstrous claws. Sometimes, nature gives even the peaceful creatures a deadly edge. We can't talk about built-to-battle dinosaurs without mentioning Tyrannosaurus rex. Sure, its teeth get most of the attention, and rightly so. They were thick, bone-crushing tools designed to pulverize prey, not just slice it. But T-Rex's bite wasn't just powerful, it was the strongest of any land animal ever. Some estimates say up to 12,000 pounds of pressure, enough to crush a car. Or another dinosaur's skull, but T-Rex also had surprisingly sturdy legs. Great depth perception, and a highly sensitive snout, possibly to detect the slightest touch, maybe even temperature changes. It wasn't just a brute. It was a precision hunter, biologically fine-tuned for its role at the top of the food chain. Course, not all weapons were so obvious. Some dinosaurs used speed as a weapon. Ornithomimids, often called ostrich dinosaurs, had long legs and lightweight bodies. They probably relied on flight, no, not the feathered kind, but sheer running speed to survive. Sometimes the best battle plan is not to fight at all, and then there were those who relied on numbers. Herbivores like Maiasaura may have lived in massive herds, possibly in the thousands. Safety in numbers. They raised their young together, nested in colonies, and likely warned each other of danger. Community can be a powerful shield, but if there's one thing all these examples show, it's that dinosaurs weren't just shaped by chance. They were shaped by conflict, predator versus prey, male versus male, species versus species. Every Spike, every horn, every plate was forged in the crucible of survival. These weren't ornaments. They were answers to life or death questions. What do you do when predators evolve sharper teeth? You grow tougher armor. What happens when rivals clash for mates? You develop horns, frills, and clubs. It's an ancient evolutionary arms race, with every generation pushing the limits of form and function. And just like modern animals, think rhinos, elephants, lions, or crocodiles, these adaptations often served more than one purpose: defense, offense, social signaling, attracting mates, warding off rivals. Nature rarely builds a tool for only one job, especially not when survival is at stake. So the next time you see a dinosaur skeleton in the museum, don't just marvel at its size. Look closer. Look at the horns worn down at the tips, the healed scars on a frill, the spikes arranged with perfect precision. These weren't creatures built by accident. They were built to battle. Chapter 9. The Feather Revelation. For generations, dinosaurs were painted as scaly, sluggish reptiles, cold-blooded beasts, stomping through steaming jungles. More lizard than bird. But then, something happened. A wave of new discoveries swept through the world of paleontology, and with it came one of the most surprising revelations in dinosaur science. Feathers. Yes, feathers. Not just on a few oddballs, but across entire branches of the dinosaur family tree. And these weren't primitive fluff patches either. Some of these creatures had full plumage display feathers, flight feathers, insulating fuzz. The Mesozoic world, it turns out, might have looked a lot more like a prehistoric aviary than a lizard-infested nightmare. But how did scientists figure this out? It started quietly in the 1990s in the Liaoning province of northeastern China. There, in a lake bed of fine volcanic ash, paleontologists uncovered fossils so perfectly preserved, they still held impressions of soft tissue, skin, muscles, and yes, feathers. The first shockwave came with Sinosauropteryx. It was a small theropod, a cousin of Velociraptor, and around its bones, a halo of fuzzy filaments, not scales, not hair, feathers, simple downy feathers. At first, scientists were cautious. Could it be decomposition fibers? A trick of the fossilization process? But then came Caudipteryx, Protarchaeopteri, and others. And their feathers weren't simple fuzz anymore. They had structure, barbs, rachises. Some even had symmetrical, veined feathers on their arms and tails. These were real feathers. Functional ones. The kind you'd expect to find on modern birds, which raised a dramatic question. Were birds dinosaurs? The answer now is a resounding yes. Birds are dinosaurs. More specifically, they're the last living branch of the theropod group, the same family that gave us T-Rex and Velociraptor. Every time you see a pigeon pecking at crumbs, or an eagle soaring overhead, you're looking at a direct descendant of the dinosaurs, not a distant cousin, a literal survivor. But what were feathers doing on dinosaurs that couldn't fly? That's where things get even more interesting. Feathers didn't evolve for flight, at least not at first. They likely began as insulation fuzzy coverings to help warm-blooded dinosaurs maintain body heat. That makes sense for small active predators like Sinosauropteryx. Think of it like a natural jacket. Then came the second function, display. Some fossils show long tail feathers with bright patterns, much like modern birds of paradise. In fact, we can now see the color patterns of some dinosaurs, using microscopic analysis of fossilized pigment cells called melanosums. Anchiornis, for example, had a black and white body with a red crest like a punk rock woodpecker. So before feathers ever lifted a dinosaur into the air, they were helping them stay warm and show off. Evolution, after all, loves a good multitasker. Then, flight came knocking. One of the biggest transitional fossils ever found was Archaeopteryx. Discovered in Germany in 1861, Just 2 years after Darwin published On the Origin of Species, it had feathered wings and a wishbone, but also teeth, clawed fingers, and a long bony tail. Half bird, half dinosaur. For over a century, it was seen as the first bird. But newer discoveries now suggest it was just one of many feathered dinosaurs experimenting with gliding and flapping. Microraptor, for instance, had 4 wings feathers on both arms and legs and likely glided between trees like a prehistoric flying squirrel. And it wasn't just the tiny guys trying to get off the ground. Uteranus, a relative of T-Rex, was over 30 feet long and covered in downy protofeathers. It's the largest feathered dinosaur known to science so far. Imagine a massive, fluffy predator like a nightmare polar bear crossed with a dragon. Feathers weren't just for flyers, they were for insulation, display, and even camouflage. But this feathered revolution wasn't just about looks. It changed how we viewed dinosaur behavior too. Feathers imply brooding, nesting, parental care. And we found fossilized evidence of dinosaurs doing exactly that, sitting on nests, guarding eggs. Oviraptor, once thought to be an egg thief, was actually protecting its clutch. The fossil shows the animal curled protectively around its eggs, wings outspread. A mother, not a thief. Some paleontologists now believe many feathered dinosaurs displayed mating dances, preened their feathers, even sang to each other. The behaviors we associate with modern birds? They may have deep dinosaur roots. This shift in understanding didn't come without resistance. For decades, popular media clung to the old image, scaly, roaring monsters. Jurassic Park sleek, leathery velociraptors were pure Hollywood fiction, especially since real velociraptors were only about the size of a turkey. And almost certainly feathered. And yet, the feather revolution hasn't fully reached the mainstream. Walk into most toy stores or theme parks, and you'll still see the old version. But slowly, surely, the truth is spreading. Museums are updating exhibits. Kids are learning about feathered dinosaurs in school. And a new generation is growing up with a very different idea of what dinosaurs were. It's not just a cosmetic change. Feathers challenge how we understand dinosaur biology. They suggest endothermy, warm-blooded metabolism, active lifestyles, high energy, faster movement, sharper minds. Some scientists even speculate that the mental capacity for problem-solving and learning might have been more widespread than we ever thought. Raptors weren't just killing machines, they were intelligent hunters. Birds today, after all, are among the smartest animals on Earth. Feathers are also a link across time. They bridge the gap between ancient and modern, reminding us that extinction isn't always the end. Sometimes it's transformation. The age of dinosaurs never truly ended. It just took to the skies. Imagine the Cretaceous landscape, a herd of duck-billed Edmontosaurus browsing peacefully. Overhead, a feathered Troodon stalks through the underbrush, eyes sharp, claws ready. Its downy body blends with the dappled light. It chirps softly, scanning for prey. High in a tree, a microraptor spreads its wings and glides silently down. This isn't science fiction. This is what the fossil record shows us. A world where feathers weren't just possible, they were everywhere. And that might be the most mind-blowing fact of all. That what we thought we knew about dinosaurs, massive, slow, scaly monsters, is only part of the story. A louder, brighter, fluffier, more dynamic truth has been hiding in the dirt all along. So the next time you hear birdsong outside your window, listen closely. That's not just nature. That's a dinosaur singing. Chapter 10, Tiny but Deadly. When people imagine deadly dinosaurs, they usually picture giants. Towering T-Rex, the sail-backed Spinosaurus, thunderous Giganotosaurus. But here's the twist. Some of the most dangerous, cunning, and evolutionarily successful dinosaurs weren't giants at all. They were small, sometimes shockingly small. And they used their size not as a weakness, but as a weapon. Let's start with Velociraptor. Thanks to Jurassic Park, most people think of it as a human-sized, scaly predator with dagger claws and a bloodthirsty grin. In reality, it was about the size of a turkey, and it had feathers. But don't let that fool you. Velociraptor was deadly in its own way. It had an enlarged sickle-shaped claw on each foot, which it could use like a razor to grip, slash, and hold prey down. Its long arms, tipped with sharp claws, were perfect for grabbing. And its skull? Filled with a surprisingly large brain and forward-facing eyes that gave it depth perception, a predator's best friend. This was no dumb brute. It was smart, agile, and lightning fast. A pack of them working together would have been terrifying. But Velociraptor was just one of many pint-sized predators that ruled their niches. Take Truden, for example. Roughly the size of a large dog, Truden had one of the highest brain-to-body ratios of any dinosaur. Some paleontologists even called it the Einstein of dinosaurs. With stereoscopic vision and serrated teeth, it likely hunted at night, using its intelligence and keen senses to track down prey in the dark. It wasn't built for brute force. It was built for strategy. Then there's Compsognathus. It barely reached the size of a chicken, yet it was fast, nimble, and equipped with sharp teeth designed for snapping up lizards, insects, and even small mammals. Fossils show that Compsognathus was incredibly light, just a few pounds. Were hollow, giving it agility and speed that made it a blur of death in the undergrowth. One fossil even shows a complete lizard inside its stomach, swallowed whole. No mess, no mercy. But perhaps the most fascinating tiny terror is Microraptor. Imagine a dinosaur the size of a crow with 4 feathered limbs. 2 wings, too. Wing-like legs. It didn't just glide, it soared. Fossils show long flight-adapted feathers, and even evidence of melanosomes. Those microscopic color cells that suggest Microraptor may have been jet black with an iridescent sheen like a raven crossed with a dragon. Now picture it launching silently from a tree, gliding toward an unsuspecting prey animal. Its teeth needle-sharp, perfect for snatching small vertebrates. Its claws grappling hooks. It didn't need strength. It had surprise. And this is what makes tiny dinosaurs so deadly: their speed, their intelligence, and their evolution-driven efficiency. These weren't lumbering brutes. They were precision machines. Even plant eaters had their own brand of menace. Take Psittacosaurus, for instance. Just under 2 meters long, it looked a bit like a scaly parrot on 4 legs. But it had cheek spikes, a sharp beak, and in some fossilized specimens, bristle-like structures on its tail, possibly for display or even defense. We've even found evidence of Psittacosaurus babies huddling in groups, suggesting strong social bonds and parenting behaviors. The fact that they could survive in such a predator-rich world says a lot about their resilience. Then there's Protoceratops, a small, frill-faced herbivore, only about the size of a sheep. But it had jaws that could crush through tough plants, and possibly even bone. It's famous for a fossil discovered locked in combat with a velociraptor claws and beak frozen in time. The small herbivore may have died, but not without a fight. And here's the kicker: being small made these dinosaurs harder to kill. While the massive giants needed enormous food supplies and struggled with changing climates, the smaller species could scavenge, hide, and adapt quickly. In fact, many scientists believe that it was these small, feathered, warm-blooded dinosaurs that were best positioned to survive the mass extinction. Think about it. When the asteroid hit 66 million years ago, it wasn't the titans who lasted. It was the adaptable, the clever, the small. The dinosaurs that were already eating insects, hiding in burrows, nesting in trees. These survivors eventually gave rise to modern birds. The line between bird and dinosaur isn't just blurry, it doesn't exist. Every sparrow, hawk, or pigeon you see today is living proof that small dinosaurs didn't go extinct. They just changed form. Even today, birds show flashes of that ancient aggression. Cassowaries, for example, those helmeted blue-skinned birds of the Australian rainforest, are literal descendants of dinosaurs. They have powerful legs, sharp claws, and enough attitude to remind anyone why their ancestors once ruled the earth. An angry cassowary can disembowel a human with a single kick. And chickens? Yes, even the humble chicken carries dinosaur DNA. Ever watched a chicken dart its head with robotic precision? Or peck with that unsettling raptor focus? That's ancient behavior, locked deep in time. We often assume that bigger is better. But in nature, size is just one tool in the evolutionary toolbox. Speed, intelligence, agility, and adaptability often win out, and in that regard, tiny dinosaurs were absolute champions. So next time you hear a bird call or watch a robin peck through the grass, don't just see a harmless creature. See a survivor. A remnant of a world where size wasn't everything. Where the fiercest fighters weren't always the biggest, but the smallest with the sharpest claws, the keenest eyes, and the smartest minds. Because in the age of dinosaurs, danger often came with feathers and stood only waist-high. Chapter 11. Unexpected herbivores. When we picture plant-eating dinosaurs, we often think of peaceful giants plodding through ancient forests. Placid, slow-moving, maybe even a little dull. But here's the surprise: some of the most intimidating, armor-plated, weaponized, and downright bizarre dinosaurs were actually herbivores. And they were anything but defenseless. Let's begin with Ankylosaurus. This dinosaur looked like a tank. If the tank had a tail that could crush bone. It wasn't even that big by dinosaur standards, about 20 to 25 feet long, but every inch of it was armored. Thick, bony plates covered its back like natural body armor, and its tail ended in a massive club of solid bone. Some scientists estimate that a full-force swing from that tail could shatter a T-Rex leg. This was no passive grazer, it was a living, breathing wrecking ball. And yet, all it ate were plants. Then there's Triceratops. Probably the most famous horned dinosaur of all, and certainly one of the most heavily armed. It had two massive horns above its eyes, one on its nose, and a bony frill protecting the back of its head. For a long time, paleontologists thought these features were just for show, maybe display, or attracting mates. But then we started finding Triceratops fossils with healed wounds, broken horns, gouges in the frill, and most importantly, bite marks. Some of those wounds matched T-Rex teeth exactly. That means Triceratops wasn't just a target. It fought back. In fact, one fossil shows a horn puncture that may have struck right into the neck of a predator. Imagine its 7 tons of muscle in fury, lowering its horns and charging full speed like a prehistoric rhino. And it did all that on a plant-based diet. Another underappreciated herbivore is Pachyrhinosaurus. It didn't have long, sharp horns, but it had a massive bony lump on its nose and thickened skull bones. Scientists believe it used these in brutal headbutting contests, possibly to establish dominance or fight off predators. If you've ever seen rams or bison lock heads, that's the idea. Only this was on a much larger scale, with more bone, more power, and much more at stake. Let's not forget Stegosaurus, with its famous double row of backplates and spiked tail known as a thagomizer. Yes, that's the real name, coined humorously and then adopted by scientists. It looked like something out of a fantasy novel. Those tail spikes could grow over 3 feet long and were likely used for defense. One fossil of an Allosaurus, a meat-eater, shows a deep puncture wound in its pelvis that matches perfectly with a Stegosaurus tail spike. The message was clear: mess with a plant eater, and you might not live to regret it. Now, not all herbivores were brutes. Some were just strange. Therizinosaurus, for example. It had huge claws, each over 3 feet long, and walked on 2 legs. It looked like a cross between a sloth and a raptor. Early scientists thought it might be a predator, maybe even a relative of T-Rex, but the teeth and gut told a different story. It was a plant-eater. So why the claws? We're still not entirely sure. Maybe they were used to pull down tree branches. Maybe they were for defense or for intimidating rivals. But one thing's for certain, this creature didn't need teeth like razors to make you back off. One look at those claws and any predator might think twice. Some herbivores use their appearance as a weapon. Take Stygimoloch, for instance. With its spiky crown and thick dome-shaped skull, it likely rammed rivals or even predators. And Protoceratops, smaller and less armored, still managed to earn a reputation as a tough opponent. As mentioned in the previous chapter, a fossil was found locked in combat with a velociraptor, each seemingly having delivered a fatal blow. No retreat. No surrender. Even the gentle-looking hadrosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs, had their own defensive strategies. Some could make loud, low-frequency calls with their crests, possibly to warn others of danger. Others traveled in huge herds, like ancient wildebeest, finding safety in numbers. Some species could rear up and run bipedally at high speeds, escaping. Instead of fighting, then there's the evolutionary genius of camouflage. Many small herbivores developed body coloring to blend into their surroundings. Some even had protofeathers or bristle-like structures that helped regulate temperature or break up their outline, perfect for hiding in dense foliage. And here's a fascinating fact. Many of these so-called gentle herbivores probably engaged in intense social behavior. Evidence suggests that some species formed tight family units. Parents guarded nests. Juveniles learned behaviors from adults. Some fossils even show groups of dinosaurs who likely died together, possibly indicating cooperative group living or migration behavior. That level of coordination is a defensive weapon all its own. So why did herbivores evolve to be so dangerous? Simple. They had to. The predators around them were fast, strong, and smart. But the plant eaters couldn't rely on brute strength alone. They had to adapt through armor, horns, speed, and sometimes sheer intimidation. Nature pushed them to become more than just prey. It made them innovators of defense. Even today, we see echoes of this in the animal kingdom. Think of the Cape. Buffalo, huge, plant-eating, and absolutely lethal when threatened. Or the porcupine, bristling with defense. Or the moose, with antlers that can impale. In nature, defense can be every bit as deadly as offense. Dinosaurs weren't any different. Their world was one of constant pressure, a high-stakes arms race between hunter and hunted. And while the predators got faster, sharper, and meaner, the herbivores got tougher, stranger, and smarter. And so, the next time you picture a giant sauropod munching leaves or a horned dinosaur plodding through the brush, don't assume it was helpless. That tail might swing with the force of a truck. Those horns might have gored the last predator that came too close. Because in the age of dinosaurs, being a plant eater didn't mean you were peaceful. It meant you had to be prepared for anything. Chapter 12, Sky Rulers. When you think of prehistoric skies, what comes to mind? Maybe winged monsters swooping down on helpless prey. Or sleek bird-like creatures soaring above the heads of dinosaurs. Well, here's the truth. The rulers of the ancient skies weren't dinosaurs at all. They were pterosaurs. And their story is even more fascinating than you might expect. Let's clear something up right away. Despite what movies and even some textbooks might suggest, pterosaurs were not flying dinosaurs. They were close relatives, part of a group called archosaurs, which includes dinosaurs, crocodilians, and birds, but they branched off on their own evolutionary path long before the first dinosaur flapped a feather. And boy, did they make the skies their domain. Pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight. Long before birds or bats, these incredible animals were already navigating the skies with grace and precision. And they weren't just gliders, they could truly fly. With powerful chest muscles and intricate wing membranes stretching from elongated fingers down to their legs, pterosaurs were agile, efficient, and often enormous. Take Quetzalcoatlus, for example. This behemoth had a wingspan estimated at over 30 feet, possibly even up to 40. That's larger than many small planes. It towered as tall as a giraffe when standing on the ground. Yet somehow it could launch itself into the air, flap those wings, and soar for miles. How? Its bones were lightweight and full of air sacs, much like birds today. But its launch strategy might surprise you. It probably didn't take off like a bird at all. Instead of a running leap, many scientists believe Quetzalcoatlus launched itself using all 4 limbs. Imagine a massive flying creature crouching, then springing skyward like a bat-powered catapult. Once airborne, it likely used thermal updrafts to cruise great distances with minimal effort. And yet, Quetzalcoatlus wasn't the only giant. There were others. Pteranodon, with its backward-swept crest and 20-foot wingspan, is perhaps the most famous. And Hatzegopteryx, another giant, might have been even heavier than Quetzalcoatlus. These animals were more than just aerial acrobats. They were apex predators in their own right, but not all pterosaurs were giants. Some were tiny, smaller than a modern pigeon. An Urognathus, for example, had a squat little body and a wide, toad-like mouth perfect for snapping up insects mid-air. With its short tail and agile wings, it likely darted through ancient forests like a prehistoric hummingbird, zipping between branches and hunting on the wing. Others, like Tepeara, had elaborate crests on their heads, some tall and sail-like. Others curved and colorful. We still don't know the full function of these structures, but they may have been used for display, species recognition, or even aerodynamics. Some scientists have compared them to the crests of modern birds like toucans or hornbills. Striking, but practical. Here's the cool part. The diversity of pterosaurs is staggering. Over 150 species have been discovered so far, and more are being named all the time. They came in all shapes and sizes, adapted to all kinds of environments: coastal, inland, forested, and desert. Some had long beaks with needle-like teeth for fishing. Others had wide jaws for scooping. Some may have even skimmed over water, like modern seabirds. But how do we really know what they were like? Fossils tell us a lot, especially the rare ones that preserve soft tissues. In some specimens, we found evidence of wing membranes, muscle fibers, and even hair-like filaments called pycnofibers. These weren't true feathers, but they served a similar purpose, insulating the body and maybe even playing a role in display. They suggest that pterosaurs were warm-blooded and highly active, more like birds than reptiles in many ways, one of the biggest surprises in recent years. Evidence that some pterosaurs might have walked with surprising skill. Footprints from species like Pteracnus show clear impressions of both hands and feet, suggesting they could move comfortably on land, especially in coastal areas where they likely hunted fish and scavenged for scraps. And let's talk about intelligence. Their brains, at least in some species, were fairly large in proportion to their bodies. Some had enlarged flocculi, regions in the brain linked to balance and coordination during flight. That suggests pterosaurs were highly skilled flyers, able to bank dive and maneuver in ways that would make a fighter pilot jealous. But flight comes with trade-offs. Pteros. AURS needed to be light to stay airborne. That meant fragile bones and a body optimized for energy efficiency. When the environment changed, like during the late Cretaceous, they became vulnerable. By the time the asteroid hit, many species were already in decline. And like the dinosaurs, pterosaurs disappeared in the mass extinction event 66 million years ago. Or did they? No. Pterosaurs didn't evolve into birds. That's a common misconception. Birds are descended from small theropod dinosaurs, not pterosaurs. But some of the behaviors and adaptations pterosaurs pioneered: powered flight, visual display crests, aerial hunting strategies can be seen echoed in modern birds today. There's even a theory that some ancient myths like dragons might have been inspired by pterosaur fossils found by early humans. Imagine stumbling across a skeleton with massive wings, a long beak, and teeth like needles. It wouldn't take much imagination to turn that into a sky monster. Despite their disappearance, pterosaurs left behind an aerial legacy. They proved that vertebrates could conquer the sky. That evolution could produce not just one, but many shapes of flight. And they remind us that prehistoric life wasn't confined to land and sea. The air was a battlefield, a highway, a home. So, next time someone calls Pteranodon a dinosaur, you'll know better. It was something even stranger. A flying reptile, separate from dinosaurs, yet living alongside them. A true pioneer of the skies. And in its time, it ruled the air like no creature before or since. Chapter 13. The color of dinosaurs. Imagine walking through a prehistoric forest. You hear the rustle of leaves. You spot something moving through the ferns. But what color is it? Is that velociraptor a dull, earthy brown? A striking red with black stripes? Maybe a shimmering blue like a modern peacock? For generations we could only guess. But now, for the first time in history, we're beginning to know color is more than decoration. In the animal kingdom, it can mean survival, camouflage, warnings, attraction, communication. But for decades, dinosaurs seemed doomed to grayscale. Reconstructions gray, green, or brown, like statues, safe, bland. Imaginative guesses were all we had. Until the discovery of melanosomes changed everything. Melanosomes are tiny structures found in the cells of feathers, hair, and skin. They carry pigment, and they come in different shapes depending on the color they produce. In modern birds, for example, rod-shaped melanosomes usually correspond to black and gray, while spherical ones are linked to reddish-brown hues. Some are even stacked in special ways that reflect light and create iridescent colors. Incredibly, paleontologists have now found fossilized melanosomes preserved in dinosaur feathers. That means we can reconstruct actual colors of dinosaurs, not just speculate. Let's start with one of the earliest breakthroughs, Anchiornis. This small, feathered dinosaur lived around 160 million years ago in what's now China. Its fossils are stunning, with feather impressions so detailed that researchers could zoom in and examine melanosomes under a microscope. What they found: a pattern that matched modern birds with a specific color scheme, black and white wings, a rusty red crown, and grayish body feathers. It looked more like a magpie than a monster. Just imagine that after 160 million years, we know the colors of a specific dinosaur, down to its flashy little head crest. That's like colorizing a black and white photo from another planet. Anchiornis wasn't alone. In the years since, paleontologists have analyzed melanosomes from a variety of feathered dinosaurs and ancient birds. Sinosauropteryx, for example, had a striped tail alternating bands of light and dark. It may have been ginger-colored with a white underbelly. A ring-tailed dino raccoon, if you will. There's evidence that some dinosaurs had camouflage patterns, similar to what we see in modern-day birds and mammals. That makes sense. Blending into your environment helps avoid predators or sneak up on prey. Some dino species had countershading. Darker on top, lighter underneath. Think of how deer or sharks look today. It's a clever trick of nature to flatten shadows and reduce visibility, but it gets even better. Some of these prehistoric feathers may have shimmered with iridescence like hummingbirds or starlings. When scientists analyzed the melanosomes of Microraptor, they found elongated, stacked structures just like those in iridescent feathers today. So this four-winged, crow-sized dino might have glimmered with metallic blue-black hues as it glided through the forest canopy. Why such bold colors? Display, perhaps. Attraction. Just like birds today, some dinosaurs likely used color to flirt, intimidate, or show off to rivals. We're talking visual communication on a scale we're only beginning to appreciate. Now here's where things get truly interesting. Not all dinosaurs had feathers. So what about the colors of those that didn't? That's harder to answer. Skin. Pigments don't fossilize as reliably as feather structures. But there have been exceptional finds. In rare cases, fossilized skin impressions show scaly textures with preserved pigment patterns. One specimen of Psittacosaurus, a parrot-beaked herbivore, preserved skin that revealed not just the pattern of scales, but also possible pigment. Shading. It suggested a back darker than the belly again, consistent with camouflage. And let's not forget the armored dinosaurs. In 2016, scientists uncovered an incredibly preserved specimen of Borealopelta, an ankylosaur covered in bony plates and skin. The fossil was so well preserved that it retained chemical signatures linked to pigmentation. What did they find? Borealopelta was reddish-brown, with darker tones across its back, more evidence of countershading. A literal tank. Wearing forest. Camouflage. Now pause and think about that. A dinosaur covered in armor, the size of a car, evolved camouflage so it wouldn't be seen. That tells us something important. There were predators out there scary enough to make a walking fortress where to hide. So what about the big stars like T-Rex? Unfortunately, we haven't yet recovered melanosums or pigment chemistry from a T-Rex fossil. But based on indirect evidence and comparisons with related species, paleontologists suggest it may have had muted tones, browns, grays, maybe even earthy greens. Perhaps some juveniles were more colorful and patterned, especially if they needed to blend into different environments than adults. The truth is, the more we learn, the more we realize dinosaurs were not dull-colored beasts stomping through monotone landscapes. Their world may have been vibrant, full of color contrasts, flashing displays, and iridescent feathers that caught the sun just right. And it raises new questions. Were some dinosaurs seasonal in color, like Arctic foxes? Did some species change hues as they matured, the way peacocks and mallards do today? Did rival males flaunt brighter feathers in mating season? Did juveniles use color to signal to parents? Or blend into underbrush? Even more exciting, some pigment molecules related to carotenoids and porphyrins, responsible for yellows, oranges, and greens, are starting to turn up in fossil analysis, although they're less stable than melanin. In the near future, we may be able to detect not just black, gray, and red, but yellow and blue as well. And here's a mind-bending possibility. What if some dinosaurs could see colors we can't? Birds today can detect ultraviolet light, which means their world is filled with hues we can't even imagine. If some dinosaurs had similar vision, then their color patterns might have glowed with signals invisible to human eyes. A hidden spectrum of communication. Of course, not all color was for show. Some was survival. And some may have simply been evolutionary noise, a side effect of diet, climate, or genes. But the bottom line is this: color wasn't just there, it mattered. It played a role in behavior, ecology, and evolution. So next time you picture dinosaur, don't imagine a boring brown reptile dragging its tail through the mud. Picture a vibrant, dynamic animal. A raptor with a red crest. A gliding Microraptor shimmering like oil on water. A camouflaged Borealopelta hiding in the ferns. The prehistoric world wasn't just alive, it was alive with color. And we're only just beginning to see it. Chapter 14. Dino Love Lives. When we think of dinosaurs, we usually imagine them roaring, hunting, or stomping across prehistoric landscapes. But here's a question that rarely gets asked. How did dinosaurs fall in love? Okay, maybe not love in the human sense. But dinosaurs weren't just killing machines or lumbering giants. They were animals, and like all animals, they had to reproduce. Which means they had to attract mates, impress rivals, raise young. And if modern birds and reptiles are any clue, those ancient mating games might have been surprisingly elaborate. Let's start with a basic. Truth: courtship is a universal force in the animal kingdom. From the shimmering feathers of birds of paradise to the thunderous bellows of alligators, animals use sound, color, movement, and strength to win partners. So it's no stretch to imagine dinosaurs doing the same, especially since we see the evidence in their bones. Take Pachycephalosaurus, for example. This dome-headed dinosaur had a skull up to 10 inches thick. Some scientists believe these heads were used for headbutting like modern rams to win dominance over other males. Others think they may have been display structures, possibly brightly colored, used to impress potential mates. Either way, that's dinosaur flirting in action. Then there's Triceratops. Its massive frill and 3 horns weren't just for defense. Their elaborate shapes may have played a role in sexual selection, much like a peacock's tail. Some fossil skulls show evidence of injury or wear, suggesting horn duels between rivals. Picture 2 male Triceratops clashing horns, each trying to prove he's worthy of passing on his genes. That's not a battle, that's a date. And it wasn't just about weapons. Display structures were everywhere. Corythosaurus, for instance, had a tall, crest-like helmet on its head that may have functioned as a resonance chamber, basically a built-in musical instrument. It could have used this to produce deep, bellowing calls across the landscape, the Mesozoic version of love songs echoing through the dawn. Speaking of singing, there's growing evidence that many dinosaurs could vocalize. While we'll never hear an exact dino song, research into bird and crocodile relatives shows that deep, resonant sounds were likely. Imagine a male dinosaur puffing out its chest and letting out a low, rhythmic call to signal strength and readiness, something that might be felt more than heard. But let's move from sound to movement. Birds today often engage in elaborate dances to impress mates. Cranes, for example, leap and twirl with synchronized precision. Could some dinosaurs have danced too? There's an amazing fossil discovery that might suggest exactly that. In Colorado, scientists found what looked like display arenas, patches of ground with dozens of scratch marks, made by the feet of feathered theropods. These weren't feeding grounds. The scratches suggest deliberate movement, repeated, choreographed motions in the same spot, like a prehistoric dance floor. This may be the first fossil evidence of mating dances in dinosaurs. And what about feathers? We often associate feathers with flight, but in many species, especially in males, they're used for display. Peacock tails, cardinal crests. Bird plumage often explodes in color and form during mating season. Feathered dinosaurs likely used theirs the same way. DeLong, a tiny relative of T-Rex, had fuzzy protofeathers. Uteranus, a much larger cousin, had an even thicker coat. These feathers might have helped with insulation, but they could also have played a visual role in courtship. What better way to show you're fit and healthy than a glossy, full coat of feathers, fluffed up and on full display? Even Velociraptor had quill knobs indicating well-developed feathers along its forearms. Not flight feathers, but perhaps something closer to plumage for show. Scientists think these could have been used in display behaviors, whether to intimidate or attract. Now, reproduction. How did dinosaurs actually do it? The truth is, we don't know everything, but we have clues. Based on comparisons with modern reptiles and birds, it's likely that most dinosaurs had a cloaca, a single opening used for reproduction and waste. It's not glamorous, but it's efficient. A fossilized cloaca from a Psittacosaurus actually shows a structure resembling that of crocodilians, complete with pigmentation. This find doesn't just tell us about anatomy, it also shows the area might have had unique colors or markings, possibly used for visual signaling during courtship. As for mating position, most paleontologists believe dinosaurs likely adopted a position where the male mounted the female from behind, similar to what we see in birds. With massive species like sauropods, it's hard to imagine the logistics, but they likely evolved specialized behaviors to make it work. Flexibility in tails and strong hind limbs may have played a role, After mating comes nesting. And this is where dinosaurs truly surprise us. Far from laying their eggs and walking away, many dinosaurs seem to have cared for their young. Fossilized nests show neatly arranged eggs, sometimes in spiral patterns. Some nests even contain adult skeletons. Lying on top of the eggs, wings outspread, a position almost identical to brooding birds. Maiasaura, whose name means good mother lizard, is the poster child of dinosaur parenting. Fossil sites show evidence of nesting colonies, juveniles growing in size within the same nest, and worn teeth suggesting that the young were fed soft food by their parents. That level of care? That's emotional investment. Theropods, too, may have guarded their nests. Oviraptor, once wrongly labeled an egg thief, was actually found curled protectively over a nest of its own eggs. It died there, likely shielding its offspring during a sudden storm or collapse. What we once mistook for theft was in fact devotion. Some dinosaurs may have even had different roles between the sexes. In some modern birds, the males do the brooding while the females hunt or defend territory. Could this behavior have started with dinosaurs? It's possible. The evolutionary bridge from dinosaurs to birds suggests many parental traits we associate with modern avians may have deep roots. Even sibling relationships can be glimpsed in the fossil record. Trackways of young dinosaurs sometimes show multiple individuals walking side by side, suggesting they moved in groups, possibly family units. Social structure among juveniles might have played a major role in survival. The picture that's forming is far richer than we once imagined. Dinosaurs weren't just prehistoric beasts. They were lovers, dancers, parents, and partners. Their mating lives were full of displays, songs, rituals, and bonds that echo into today's birds. It changes the way we see them. The roaring predator becomes a careful nest builder. The horned titan becomes a rival in a romantic duel. The feathered raptor becomes a show-off, strutting and preening to impress a mate. In the end, love, or at least reproduction, was as central to dinosaur life as it is to ours. And now, millions of years later, we're finally beginning to understand the drama, tenderness, and strategies behind those ancient courtships. They weren't monsters, they were animals. And they loved in their own magnificent prehistoric way. Chapter 15. The Death Pose Mystery. There's something unsettling about many dinosaur fossils. Their skeletons are twisted into a specific haunting position. Heads arched back, mouths agape, tails curved high over their bodies, sometimes like a final screen frozen in time. Paleontologists call it the opistotonic posture, a word that's scientific, but doesn't quite capture the strange drama of these fossilized moments. It looks like agony. Like the dinosaur died mid-spasm, writhing in pain. And for decades, scientists have puzzled over exactly what caused it. Was it the throes of death? Some kind of violent seizure? Or something else entirely? At first glance, it seems like a simple question. But the more you dig into it, pun intended, the more complex and fascinating it becomes. Let's start with what we know. This death pose shows up a lot. From small theropods like Compsognathus to giants like Allosaurus, the backward arching neck and tail is oddly consistent. And it's not just dinosaurs. Some ancient birds and reptiles preserved in sedimentary rock layers show the same contorted arrangement. So what's happening? One early idea was that this position happened after death, not during it. That once the dinosaur's muscles relaxed, ligaments in the neck and spine, especially the strong ones running along the back, would slowly pull the body into this posture as the carcass dried out. Like elastic bands snapping back. That theory made some sense. In death, the body goes through dehydration. Tissues shrink, ligaments tighten. If a dinosaur's body was left exposed in a dry, windy environment, its soft tissue might dry and contract, pulling the head backward like a drawn bow. But there was a problem. Not all dinosaurs in the opisthotic pose were found in dry, desolate settings. Some were discovered in what had once been watery lakebeds, places where desiccation wouldn't occur. Others were buried quickly, preserved under fine-grained ash or mud. In these cases, the body hadn't had time to dry out, so dehydration couldn't be the only explanation. That led researchers to consider another idea. The dinosaur died in a seizure. Specifically, a neurological one caused by brain trauma, asphyxiation, or poisoning. In modern animals, including birds and reptiles, lack of oxygen can trigger this same posture. The muscles of the neck and spine contract violently, arching the head and tail backward in what's called a tonic seizure. Think of a chicken with its head cut off. The spasms, the twisting, it's not that different. So maybe dinosaurs didn't just die and then curl up. Maybe they died while curling up. That's a grim thought, and one with serious implications. If that's true, it could mean that many dinosaurs perished in extreme conditions, massive volcanic eruptions, rapid flooding, or toxic gas clouds. Events capable of suffocating an entire ecosystem in moments. Some scientists have pointed to events like the ash falls in what's now Liaoning province, China, where incredibly well-preserved fossils of feathered dinosaurs are often found in the death pose. These animals may have been caught in sudden volcanic blasts, buried alive in fine ash that suffocated them. Their final spasms captured in stone. It's like Pompeii, but for dinosaurs. Another theory relates to water. Paleontologist Cynthia Marshall proposed that the death pose could be caused not by dehydration or seizures, but by post-mortem movement in water. In this view, after a dinosaur died and floated in a lake or river, its tendons and muscles would start to contract. The buoyancy of water could allow the limbs and spine to arch unnaturally, especially as decay gases inflated the body. Once the carcass settled and was buried by sediment, that pose became fossilized. Water, in this case, acts like a slow, invisible puppeteer, manipulating the dinosaur's remains into unnatural positions. It's compelling and maybe even more eerie. Imagine a dead dinosaur drifting downstream, limbs curling, neck arching back slowly as gases bubble inside. Then it sinks, gets buried. And millions of years later, a paleontologist uncovers what looks like a moment of terror, locked in stone. So which theory is correct? Here's the catch. It might not be just one. In fact, it probably isn't. Depending on the species, environment, and circumstances of death, different forces could be at play. Some dinosaurs may have suffered seizures from traumatic injury or suffocation. Others may have dried out in deserts or twisted in water before burial. The death pose isn't a single, 'cause it's a recurring effect. That's why it appears so often. The dinosaur body was built in a way that naturally tended toward that posture when its biological systems broke down. Let's go a bit deeper. Birds, modern descendants of dinosaurs, have an incredibly complex nervous system governing balance and posture. Their brains constantly adjust the neck and limbs in response to changes in position. When that system fails due to injury, trauma, or disease, the results can be dramatic. Seizure-like rigidity, full body contortion. It's not just in chickens. Raptors, cranes, even parrots have been observed in similar postures when fatally injured. And reptiles like crocodiles or lizards can show the same effect. Oxygen deprivation can cause them to arch backward in death. This gives further support to the neurological seizure theory for at least some fossils. But here's what makes it so fascinating. Whatever the cause, the death pose gives us insight into how these animals died. Not just what they looked like or how they moved in life, but the very moments at the end. It's a rare emotional window into prehistory. Think of all the ways a fossil can form: mudslides, floods, sandstorms, eruptions. These were violent deaths, often sudden and unexpected. The aposthatonic posture preserves not just bones, but the struggle. And when you look at fossil beds filled with these contorted skeletons, multiple individuals frozen in the same dramatic pose, it starts to feel like a prehistoric tragedy. An entire herd caught mid-panic. A nesting colony smothered in seconds. A young raptor gasping for breath as ash fills the air. It changes the tone. These aren't just bones. They're echoes of real living, breathing creatures. Caught in their final act. And beyond the tragedy, there's a mystery that continues to unfold. Even today, paleontologists are running experiments soaking modern bird carcasses, testing ligament strength, simulating decay in water, all in the hope of better understanding that strange curve of the neck and tail. The more we learn, the closer we get to the moment of death itself. It's not morbid, it's illuminating, because understanding how dinosaurs died teaches us about how they lived, their biology, their behavior, their vulnerabilities, and the environments that could end their lives in an instant. So the next time you see a dinosaur skeleton arched back in that haunting pose, don't just think of death. Think of what that moment meant. The final seconds of a creature's life, preserved with unintentional poetry across the ages. That twist of the neck, it's the last trace of a world we can barely imagine, but are still trying to understand. Chapter 16. Ancient Footprints. Sometimes the most powerful stories dinosaurs left behind weren't their bones, or their teeth, or their claws. They were impressions, silent steps frozen in mud, preserved for millions of years. Footprints, trackways, trails of motion, moments in time that no skeleton can replicate. Imagine this: a group of sauropods trudging through a shallow riverbed, their massive feet sinking into the soft earth. Moments later, smaller theropods follow, weaving between the prints. Then the water recedes, mud hardens, layers build. And long after the bones of those creatures have crumbled, the path they walked remains. Footprints are different from fossils in a profound way. Fossils tell us what dinosaurs were. Footprints tell us what they did, and that changes everything. At first glance, a dinosaur track might not look like much. A three-toed depression here, a wide circular print there. But with careful study, paleontologists can pull astonishing information from those shapes. How fast the animal was moving, whether it was walking or running, if it limped, if it was alone or part of a group. In some cases, tracks have even revealed behaviors we never expected. One of the most famous discoveries came from Glen Rose, Texas, where long trackways of sauropods and theropods crisscross an ancient riverbed. Some of the prints show a small theropod seemingly trailing behind a massive herbivore. Was it stalking? Following a herd? Walking through an area long after the sauropods had passed? That single set of footprints launched decades of debate. Because it wasn't just what was walking, but why. Even more compelling are the discoveries. In places like Queensland, Australia, or the limestone layers of France. In these regions, long trails of parallel dinosaur tracks have been found moving together, side by side, for dozens of meters. Not just one animal. Groups. It was one of the first lines of evidence that some dinosaurs may have moved in organized herds. And we're not talking small groups here. Some trackways show dozens of individuals, all moving in the same direction, with similar strides. That kind of consistency points to coordinated behavior like modern elephants or wildebeests. Herding. Behavior doesn't fossilize in bones, but in footprints. It leaves a trail. And then there are the nesting grounds. In Patagonia, Argentina, paleontologists uncovered massive colonies of sauropod nests. But alongside the eggs, they found tracks. Adults had clearly walked in and out of the site, moving around the nests. Some prints were smaller juveniles, perhaps just hatched. These weren't random visitors. They were families. What does that tell us? That some dinosaurs didn't just lay their eggs and leave. They stayed, protected, maybe even raised their young for a time. Again, behavior hidden not in skeletons, but in step marks. One of the most haunting examples comes from South Korea. There, in a coastal site known as the Dinosaur Coast, hundreds of tiny footprints were discovered. barely the size of a coin. Paleontologists believe they were made by newly hatched dinosaurs, moving in small clusters. It's an image as powerful as any roaring T-Rex. Tiny dinosaurs walking together, maybe for the first time, exploring the world they just entered. And the soft mud caught it all. And let's not forget about speed. Dinosaur speed has always fascinated us. Could a T-Rex outrun a Jeep? Was Velociraptor really as fast as Jurassic Park made it out to be? Trackways give us real answers. By measuring the stride length between footprints and comparing it to the estimated leg length of the species, we can calculate walking or running speeds with surprising accuracy. Some theropod trackways suggest running speeds over 30 kilometers per hour, nearly 20 miles per hour. That's fast, but not quite Hollywood-level sprinting. Other footprints show careful, slow pacing. Dinosaurs that weren't chasing or fleeing, but simply wandering. One remarkable site in Spain preserves a chase. A predator's tracks close. The distance on smaller herbivores. The spacing between prints increases. The predator begins to run, and then the trail ends. Did the prey escape? Did the hunter succeed? We don't know. But the story is there, told in dirt and stone. Even swimming dinosaurs leave clues. Yes, swimming. In some regions, especially in Asia, scientists have found long claw marks, just the front tips of toes, dragging across ancient riverbeds. Rest of the foot didn't press down, just the tips. It's the kind of track you'd expect if the dinosaur was partially buoyant, paddling, gliding just above the surface with its claws skimming along the bottom. These aren't footprints. They're underprints of a swimmer. Suddenly, the idea of a dinosaur swimming across a shallow lake doesn't sound so far-fetched. Some may have waded, others floated. And some, like Spinosaurus, may have been true aquatic hunters. Then, there's the artistry. In some indigenous cultures, dinosaur footprints were revered long before modern science could explain them. In parts of North America, ancient peoples discovered these tracks embedded in rock and interpreted them as signs of great beasts or spirit animals. Even today, standing beside a perfectly preserved footprint can feel spiritual. There's something intimate about it. You're not just looking at a fossil, you're standing where a dinosaur once stood. It puts time into perspective. 65 million years is an unfathomable number, but one footprint shrinks that distance. For a moment, it feels like the dinosaur was just here. Like you missed it by minutes, not millennia. And sometimes, humans have walked in those steps, literally. In places like the Paluxy River in Texas, there are controversial claims of human footprints overlapping with dinosaur tracks. These have mostly been debunked, misidentified erosions, hoaxes, but they remind us how powerful these impressions are. People want to believe they walked with giants. The footprints make it feel possible, but perhaps the most powerful thing about dinosaur footprints is their fragility. They're often far more delicate than bone. A single rainstorm can destroy them. So when we do find preserved tracks, especially with skin impressions, claw details, or full trackways, they're nothing short of miracles. Each one is a message sent across time. A diary entry scrawled in mud, and we're still decoding them. Today, paleontologists use drones, 3D scanners, and computer modeling to analyze tracks. Some sites are so rich they've been turned into protected parks. Others are still being uncovered in deserts, riverbeds, even highways under construction. Every new footprint adds a chapter to the dinosaur story. And here's the best part. Some of the most groundbreaking discoveries have been made not by experts, but by ordinary people. A hiker, a farmer, a curious kid with a sharp eye, because all it takes is a single step to open a window into the past. One step, then another, and just like that, you're following a trail that hasn't been walked in 100 million years. Chapter 17. Myths versus reality. For decades, dinosaurs have ruled not just museums, but movie screens, toy aisles, and bedtime stories. They've become larger than life, both literally and figuratively. But here's the thing. Most of what people think they know about dinosaurs is wrong. Some of it's outdated science. Some is pop culture distortion. And some is just pure imagination, amplified by the roar of a T-Rex and the dramatic music of a Hollywood blockbuster. But real paleontology? It tells a much more complex and often far more surprising story. Let's start with perhaps the biggest offender, the idea that all dinosaurs were giant, slow-moving reptiles. For most of the 20th century, dinosaurs were portrayed as sluggish, swamp-dwelling lizards, cold-blooded, dim-witted, hulking beasts that moved with the urgency of a sleepy crocodile. But modern science has flipped that narrative on its head. We now know that many dinosaurs, especially theropods like Velociraptor and Troodon, were fast, agile, and likely warm-blooded. These animals didn't plod. They sprinted, they hunted. They even nested and protected their young. In fact, the warm-bloodedness debate has completely transformed our understanding of how dinosaurs lived. Warm-blooded creatures can regulate their internal temperature, allowing for sustained activity. That's the difference between a lizard that basks in the sun and a bird that flies across continents. And speaking of birds, here comes another myth, that dinosaurs are all extinct. Nope, not even close. Birds are dinosaurs. That's not poetic metaphor or scientific stretching. It's hard fact. From their hollow bones to their wishbones, feathers, and egg-laying behaviors, birds are direct descendants of a specific group of dinosaurs, known as Mataraptoran theropods. Think Velociraptor, Deinonychus, and their feathered cousins. So next time you see a pigeon waddling across the sidewalk, you're looking at the evolutionary cousin of T-Rex. Not quite as terrifying, but technically a dinosaur all the same. Then there's the myth of Velociraptor itself. Thanks, Jurassic Park. In the films, raptors are man-sized, scaly, and terrifyingly clever, capable of opening doors and executing coordinated attacks. But the real Velociraptor, it was about the size of a turkey. Feathered, likely intelligent. Yes, but not quite Hollywood's pack-hunting super predator. The dinosaur used in the film was actually modeled more closely on Deinonychus, a larger, related species, but Velociraptor had the better name. So it got the spotlight. Another myth, that the biggest predators were always the deadliest. We tend to assume that the larger the dinosaur, the more dangerous it was. But size wasn't everything. Yes, T-Rex was a massive bone-crushing predator, but it wasn't fast. Studies suggest its top speed was around 12 to 20 kilometers per hour, 7 to 12 miles per hour, a brisk jog at best. It likely relied on ambush or scavenging just as often as active hunting. Compare that to smaller predators like Troodon, which had large eyes adapted for night vision and may have hunted in packs. Or Velociraptor, whose sharp claws and quick reflexes made it a more surgical killer. In the world of dinosaurs, danger came in all sizes. Now, let's talk about posture. Many of us grew up with images of dinosaurs, like Stegosaurus dragging their tails along the ground, or T-Rex standing upright like a kangaroo on its back legs. But that image is long outdated. Modern reconstructions show that T-Rex held its body horizontally, tail extended for balance, like a seesaw. It didn't lean back on its tail, it balanced with it. Likewise, Stegosaurus kept its tail off the ground, ready to swing it like a weapon. These posture corrections don't just change how dinosaurs looked, they change how we understand their movement, balance, and even interactions. Another big myth, that the dinosaurs all died out at once in a sudden, fiery apocalypse. While it's true that an asteroid strike 66 million years ago caused massive devastation, the extinction wasn't instantaneous. Some species survived for thousands of years after the impact. Others may have already been declining due to volcanic activity and climate shifts. The extinction wasn't a clean slate, it was messy, chaotic, and uneven. And it didn't kill everything. Crocodiles, birds, turtles, small mammals, they survived. Some thrived. Which brings us to another misconception, that mammals only appeared after dinosaurs disappeared. Wrong again. Mammals lived alongside dinosaurs for tens of millions of years. They were small, mostly nocturnal, and probably lived in burrows or trees, but they were there evolving in the shadows. When the dinosaurs fell, mammals were ready to rise. Even the word dinosaur is misunderstood. It doesn't mean terrible lizard, as many people think. The name, coined by Richard Owen in 1842, comes from the Greek dinos, fearfully great, and sauros, lizard. So dinosaur really means fearfully great lizard, but they weren't actually lizards. Dinosaurs belong to their own distinct evolutionary group. Lizards are squamates. Dinosaurs are archosaurs, along with crocodilians and birds. So lumping them together is like confusing cats with kangaroos. Same kingdom, wildly different lineages. And while we're clearing things up, let's talk about feathers. A lot of people still think dinosaurs were all scaly, leathery reptiles. But fossil evidence from places like Liaoning, China, has shown that many dinosaurs had feathers or feather-like structures. Not just raptors, but even some early tyrannosaurs and herbivores. Feathers weren't just for flight. They provided insulation, display, camouflage, and maybe even helped young dinosaurs glide or balance. That changes everything about how they looked. Imagine a velociraptor not as a scaly killer, but as a bird-like creature with a plume of tail feathers and a crest of colorful quills. Suddenly, it's not just scary, it's beautiful. And what about the sound of dinosaurs? Movies love to give them roars. Deep, echoing, lion-like bellows that shake the jungle. But the truth? We don't know exactly what they sounded like. They may have hissed, cooed, or boomed through resonance chambers like modern birds and crocodiles. Some may have made no sound at all. Sound doesn't fossilize. But skull structures and modern comparisons suggest that many dinosaurs didn't roar, they rumbled. And finally, one of the most enduring myths, that dinosaurs were just mindless beasts. The stereotype of dinosaurs as dim-witted is long gone. Brain size varied wildly, but some species, especially theropods, show signs of advanced cognition, brooding behaviors, tool use, pack coordination. Even social structures. Were they as smart as primates? Probably not. But dumb? Not even close. In fact, had the asteroid not hit, some paleontologists believe certain dinosaurs like Truden could have continued evolving higher intelligence. The idea of a dino sapping isn't pure science fiction. It's speculative, but rooted in real evolutionary potential. In the end, debunking dinosaur myths isn't just about correcting the record. It's about seeing these creatures for what they truly were: complex, diverse, ever-evolving animals that lived in a world just as dynamic as our own. Not monsters, not movie villains. Not just bones in a museum, but real animals with real stories. Some we've told for centuries, and many we're only beginning to uncover. Chapter 18. The Rise of T-Rex. There's something about Tyrannosaurus rex that captures the imagination like no other dinosaur. Maybe it's the name Tyrant Lizard King. Maybe it's the sheer size, or those bone-crushing jaws, or the fact that it dominated the late Cretaceous with a kind of ferocity that still echoes through pop culture today. But how did T-Rex rise to power? And what don't most people know about this prehistoric celebrity? First, it's important to understand that T-Rex didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of nearly 100 million years of evolution. The earliest tyrannosaurs looked nothing like the beast we know today. In fact, they were small, fast, and lightweight, more like cheetahs than tanks. One of the earliest known tyrannosaurs, Proceratosaurus, lived about 165 million years ago and was no larger than a human. It had long legs, a narrow skull, and likely relied more on speed than brute force. Over time, Tyrannosaurs gradually adapted to changing environments, shifting ecosystems, and evolving prey. Their bodies became more robust. Their skulls grew thicker and stronger. Their arms shrank, but their jaws became weapons of unimaginable force. But here's a twist. For most of the age of dinosaurs, tyrannosaurs weren't top predators at all. During the Jurassic period and early Cretaceous, apex predator roles were filled by other theropods like the massive Allosaurus, the sail-backed Spinosaurus, and the stocky Carcharodontosaurus. Tyrannosaurs were still on the sidelines, smaller carnivores navigating a world dominated by giants. So what changed? Around 90 million years ago, many of those dominant theropods began to vanish, possibly due to shifting climates and mass extinctions in certain regions. And that's when tyrannosaurs started their rise. By the late Cretaceous, North America became the stage for the ultimate predator to take shape. The environment was perfect. Massive herbivores like Triceratops and Edmontosaurus roamed the plains, and the forests provided dense cover for stalking prey. This was the perfect hunting ground for an intelligent, powerful predator. Enter T-Rex. It wasn't just big, it was record-breaking. Measuring up to 40 feet long and weighing around 9 tons, it had a bite force of over 12,000 pounds, stronger than any living animal today. Its teeth weren't blades, they were bone-crushing bananas, some nearly a foot long and capable of pulverizing skeletons like twigs. But T-Rex wasn't just muscle. It had brains too. Fossilized brain cases show that T-Rex had an unusually large olfactory bulb, meaning it had an extraordinary sense of smell. Some scientists compare it to a vulture's ability to detect decaying flesh from miles away. It also had keen eyesight and depth perception, thanks to forward-facing eyes. This combination made it an elite tracker, whether for fresh prey or a convenient carcass. Now, about those tiny arms. They're the butt of jokes everywhere. Memes, cartoons, even movies have poked fun at T-Rex's little limbs. But small doesn't mean useless. The arms were thickly muscled, ending in 2 strong claws. They may have helped T-Rex rise from a resting position or hold on to struggling prey. Some paleontologists even suggest they were important for mating or balance during feeding. And let's not forget how fast it grew. Young T-Rex individuals were built like long-legged sprinters, likely relying on speed to catch prey. Then, around adolescence, their growth rate exploded. Some gained as much as 1,500 pounds per year. By age 20, they were full-grown behemoths. But perhaps the most surprising thing about T-Rex is that it may not have always hunted alone. While it's still debated, there's growing evidence that young and adult tyrannosaurs may have lived in groups, occupying different roles in the same hunting pack. Juveniles could have chased and harassed prey while the adults closed in for the kill. It's a terrifying idea, not one T-Rex, but an entire family unit coordinating a hunt. And there's more. New fossil finds suggest that T-Rex may have been surprisingly tender when it came to its young. Evidence of nesting sites and bone arrangements hint at protective, even parental behavior. So maybe the king of the dinosaurs wasn't just a killer, it was a caregiver too. Let's also talk about its legacy. Because while T-Rex ruled the land in its time, its story didn't end with extinction. Its evolutionary lineage lives on in birds, and its cultural legacy lives on in books, films, and museums worldwide. From the animated classics of childhood to the monstrous creatures of modern cinema, T-Rex remains the face of dinosaurs. But the real animal? It's even more fascinating than the fiction, because behind the roar, beyond the teeth, and past the jokes about those tiny arms, T-Rex was a marvel of evolution refined over millions of years into a near-perfect predator. It was intelligent, adaptable, and terrifyingly effective. The rise of T-Rex wasn't just about being the biggest. It was about being the best. Nature doesn't play favorites, but for a brief moment in Earth's history, it gave us a king. And once you've stood at the top, You never really fade away. Chapter 19 Survivors of the Apocalypse 66 million years ago. Everything changed. It started with a flash, then a shockwave. The ground trembled, the skies darkened, and the age of dinosaurs came to an abrupt and fiery end. But what if the story didn't quite stop there? What if some of them made it through? The asteroid impact that ended the Cretaceous was one of the most violent events in Earth's history. It struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico with the force of over 1 billion atomic bombs. Wildfires swept across continents. Mega tsunamis battered coastlines. And then came the cold months. Maybe years of darkness as ash and soot choked the atmosphere, collapsing the food chain from the bottom up. It's a mass extinction so absolute that we often imagine it as a total wipeout. But it wasn't. Roughly 75% of all species vanished, but that means 25% didn't. And among those survivors, some were descendants of dinosaurs. But before we get to them, it's important to understand who didn't make it. All non-avian dinosaurs, meaning all the familiar giants like Triceratops, T-Rex, Ankylosaurus, and Velociraptor perished. The big-bodied reptiles were simply too dependent on a stable ecosystem, vegetation for herbivores, herbivores for carnivores, and specific climates for all. When the system broke down, so did they. So who had what it took to survive? Let's start with the underdogs. Small mammals had been living in the shadows for millions of years, literally. While dinosaurs dominated the surface world, mammals evolved in the nooks and crannies. They were mostly nocturnal, burrowing, and opportunistic. When the asteroid hit, that lifestyle gave them an edge. They could hide, they could hibernate, and they could eat just about anything. Some lizards, snakes, frogs, and even crocodilians also pulled through. Their semi-aquatic habitats may have shielded them from the worst. Plus, like mammals, they needed fewer resources to survive and were more flexible in their diets. But the most fascinating survivors of all? The birds. Yes, birds are dinosaurs. More specifically, they're avian dinosaurs, descended from small theropods like Microraptor and Archaeopteryx. And while their larger cousins vanished, certain bird lineages squeaked through. Why? Well, it seems size mattered. Smaller body mass required less food and allowed for faster reproduction. Some birds may have already been living in forested or coastal environments, helping them escape the worst conditions. Others may have eaten seeds or detritus resources that were still available even after the collapse of complex food chains. What's even more remarkable is how quickly life rebounded. Within a few 100,000 years, a blink in geological terms, new species began to emerge. Mammals began to grow larger. Birds diversified. Crocodilians adapted to new niches. The planet, scarred but not defeated, evolved. One bird species, in particular Asteriornis mostrictensis, nicknamed the Wonder Chicken, offers a rare glimpse into the survivors. Discovered in Belgium, its fossil sits right on the line between dinosaur and modern bird. It likely lived just before or after the extinction event and resembles the common ancestor of ducks and chickens. It's small, delicate, and beautifully adapted to a changing world. But surviving wasn't just about luck. It was about resilience, about being small, adaptable, and resourceful. Imagine this. While towering T-Rex roamed North America, flocks of small, beaked birds pecked through the underbrush, unnoticed and unremarkable. Yet when fire rained from the sky, those humble birds lived on, becoming the ancestors of everything from hummingbirds to ostriches. It's poetic in a way. The mighty fell, but the meek inherited the earth, and the evolutionary aftershocks of that survival echo into today. Birds are now the most diverse group of land vertebrates on the planet. From songbirds to seabirds, they carry the legacy of dinosaurs in every feather, every bone, every call. Some still have claws on their wings. Some hatch with tiny teeth. Their skeletons, respiratory systems, and even reproductive anatomy still bear signs of their ancient past. The next time you watch a pigeon take off or a hawk swoop through the air, remember you're watching a dinosaur fly. And what about us? Well, without the asteroid, humans might never have evolved. If the dinosaurs had remained dominant, mammals may have stayed small, skittering in the shadows. That fiery apocalypse cleared the slate, giving rise to a new chapter of life, one that eventually led to primates, apes, and yes, us. In that way, the survivors of the apocalypse didn't just save their own lineages, they paved the way for ours. The story of the end of the dinosaurs isn't just a tragedy. It's a transformation. Life didn't die out, it adapted. It evolved. It rose again from the ashes. And the most extraordinary part? You still see its legacy every single day. Chapter 20, The Dino Legacy. Dinosaurs are gone, or so the story goes. But if you've followed us this far, you know by now that story's incomplete. Because dinosaurs never truly disappeared. Their bones lie beneath our feet. Their shapes echo in birds overhead. Their influence, their legacy, their presence, it still lingers in science, culture, and even in our own imaginations. But let's rewind just a bit. When the asteroid hit, the age of dinosaurs as we knew it came to an end. The great beasts of the Mesozoic, the horned, the plated, the towering carnivores were gone. But not all was lost. Feathered survivors rose from the ashes, adapting, evolving, and diversifying into the thousands of bird species that populate the world today. Every chirp you hear in the morning, every seagull at the beach, every owl in the forest, it's a whisper from the Cretaceous. That's not just poetic. It's scientific fact. Birds are the last living dinosaurs. And they carry more than just DNA. They carry behavior, anatomy, and ancient instincts. Some nest in colonies, some dance to courtmates, some even use tools. Their intelligence is on par with primates in many cases, a reminder that evolution doesn't stop, it adapts. But the legacy of dinosaurs doesn't live on only in birds. It lives on in our curiosity. Every fossil dug from ancient rock is a message from deep time. From the towering Brachiosaurus bones found in Utah to tiny raptor claws in Mongolia, these remnants stitch together a timeline that spans hundreds of millions of years. They teach us about extinction, about resilience, about the unimaginable scale of Earth's history. And they change us. They inspire art, movies, books, even dreams. Think of the first time you saw a dinosaur skeleton as a kid. That towering frame. Those impossible teeth, that overwhelming sense of wonder. Dinosaurs aren't just prehistoric creatures. They are icons, gateways to science and imagination. And let's be honest, they make science cool. Paleontology often begins with a single spark, something a child sees or reads. Dinosaurs ignite that spark. They bridge the gap between science fiction and science fact. They show us that the world was once stranger, wilder, and more alien than anything we can imagine. And it still is, in many ways. But there's more. The story of dinosaurs also teaches us humility. They ruled Earth for over 160 million years. Think about that. Humanity? We've been around for about 300,000. The entirety of recorded history writing. Cities, culture is less than 6,000 years old. Compared to dinosaurs, we're barely out of the nest, and yet, they're gone and we're here. That fact should make us wonder. What made them vulnerable? What can we learn from their extinction? Well, one key lesson is this: even the mightiest can fall. Even the dominant species can disappear in the blink of an eye when the world changes. Climate shifts, meteor strikes, ecological collapse. These are reminders that life is fragile. And no kingdom is forever. The Earth doesn't need us. It never did. It kept turning through mass extinctions, through ice ages and infernos. And it will keep turning long after we're gone. But that's not a reason to despair. It's a reason to pay attention. Understanding the past helps us protect the future. Studying dinosaurs helps us understand ecosystems, evolution, biodiversity, and yes, how fragile life can be in the face of global change. The patterns of the past are warnings, but they're also guides. Dinosaurs were not just brute beasts. They were complex, adaptive, and diverse. And their story still has more to tell. Every year, new species are discovered. New insights are unearthed. Some dinosaurs had feathers. Some had crests that could honk. Some may have glowed under UV light. We've barely scratched the surface. The more we learn, the more dynamic the dinosaur world becomes, and the more connected we feel to it. Because here's the final, perhaps most mind-blowing truth of all. We are part of the same story. Dinosaurs didn't exist in some unreachable past. They lived on the same earth, under the same sun, breathing the same air, just in a different chapter of the book. And now we're writing the next one, whether it's tracking footprints in desert rock, analyzing ancient DNA, or watching a hawk soar overhead. We are living with their legacy every single day. Dinosaurs didn't vanish, they evolved. They transformed. They became. And as long as birds sing, as long as fossils speak, and as long as we wonder, they will never truly be gone.